When a 140-pound pit bull trained for bloodshed explodes in Manhattan's deadliest restaurant, one waitress does the impossible. She stops him without a weapon, without fear, just her voice and steady hands. Lena Hart has 72 hours before her sister's cancer treatment gets cut off. The Mafia boss who owns the beast offers her a deal. Move into his fortress, fix his broken dog, and he'll pay for everything. But Lena's corrupt federal agent X has other plans. He wants her to spy on the man who just saved her sister's life, or watch Sophie die. This is the story of a woman who walked into a war zone to save a monster and discovered she was stronger than the men who tried to own her. If you want to see how far loyalty can bend before it breaks, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The thing about working at Corso Ristorante wasn't the danger. It was the performance of pretending there wasn't any. Lena Hart had mastered that performance over 18 months of slinging prime cuts and aged wine to men whose smiles cost more than most people's funerals. She'd learned to read the room like sheet music, which tables wanted invisibility, which wanted theater, and which ones, the ones near the back corner booth, wanted both simultaneously while conducting business that would never appear on any ledger the IRS could subpoena. Tuesday nights were usually quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like held breath. Lena pushed through the kitchen's swinging doors with a tray of dirty glassware balanced against her hip, her white shirt already showing sweat marks despite the restaurant's aggressive air conditioning. Behind her, the line cook shouted in rapid-fire Italian and Spanish, their voices creating a wall of sound that somehow felt safer than the dining room's cultivated silence. "Table 12 needs water," Marco, the floor manager, hissed as she set down the tray. His eyes were doing that thing they did when he was nervous, darting toward the corner booth like a rabbit checking for hawks. "And for the love of everything, don't make eye contact." Lena didn't need to ask which table. There was only one that mattered tonight. Dante Moretti had arrived 20 minutes ago with his usual entourage, 2 men in expensive suits that didn't quite hide their shoulder holsters, and Brutus, the 140-pound pit bull that walked beside Moretti like a 4-legged declaration of war. The dog was legendary in a city that didn't scare easily. Stories circulated among the staff. Brutus once tore through a rival crew's enforcer, left the man alive but permanently reminded of his mistakes. Another story claimed the dog had been trained on live targets in underground fighting rings before Moretti acquired him. Lena had heard them all. She'd also watched Brutus for 18 months, and what she saw didn't match the mythology. She grabbed a fresh water pitcher and moved through the dining room with the practiced invisibility of service industry veterans everywhere. Don't be memorable. Don't be slow. Don't be anything except efficient and gone. But she couldn't help watching the dog. Brutus sat pressed against Moretti's leg, his massive head swiveling with mechanical precision to track every movement in the room. His body was pure muscle under a coat of brindle gray, built like something designed by committee to inflict maximum damage. A thick chain leash ran from his reinforced collar to Moretti's hand, though everyone knew the chain was psychological. If Brutus wanted to move, no chain would stop him. What caught Lena's attention wasn't the dog's size or reputation, it was the tension. Every muscle in that animal's body was coiled tight. His breathing was shallow and rapid, his ears pinned back flat against his skull. The whites of his eyes showed in constant crescents as he tracked the room with the hypervigilance of something expecting attack from every direction simultaneously. That wasn't aggression. That was terror wearing an aggressive mask. Lena had grown up around dogs. Back when her father was alive and their family home in upstate New York had 4 rescues rotating through various stages of rehabilitation. She'd learned early that most aggressive dogs were just terrified animals who'd learned that offense was the only defense that worked. The mean ones, the truly dangerous ones, were usually the ones humans had broken first. She filled water glasses at table 12 without looking directly at anyone, her hands steady even as her peripheral vision cataloged everything. The way Moretti's lieutenants sat with their backs to walls, the bulge of concealed weapons, the tension in Brutus's haunches like compressed springs. "Thank you," one of the lieutenants said, his voice carrying the kind of politeness that felt like a test. Lena nodded and retreated, but not before catching Moretti's eyes for a half-second. Dante Moretti didn't look like the monster the newspapers described. He was somewhere in his late 30s, dark hair cut precisely, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Lena made in 6 months. His face had strong features that might have been handsome if they weren't so carefully controlled, like he'd learned early that showing genuine emotion was a vulnerability his world would exploit. But his eyes were what stopped her. Dark, intelligent, and absolutely exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Those were the eyes of someone who'd seen too much and couldn't look away. Lena broke the contact and headed back toward the kitchen, mentally calculating her tips for the night against Sophie's mounting medical bills. Her 15-year-old sister's leukemia treatment was bleeding Lena dry. Insurance covered some of it, but the experimental trial that was actually working cost $40,000 per round, and Sophie needed at least 3 more rounds before they'd know if she'd make it to 16. The math was simple and devastating. Lena was drowning, and nobody was throwing life preservers. "You good?" Maria, another server, asked as Lena grabbed her next orders from the kitchen window. "Always," Lena lied, forcing a smile that felt like lifting weights. The lie lasted another 40 minutes. Lena was delivering desserts to a table of Wall Street types trying to impress their dates with expense account excess when she heard the front door crash open. The sound cut through the restaurant's ambient noise like a gunshot, sudden, violent, wrong. Every head turned. 3 men stumbled in, already drunk, already loud. The one in front wore a leather jacket despite the May heat, his face flushed red with alcohol and something meaner. Lena recognized the type immediately. Guys who'd grown up with just enough money to feel entitled to everything and just enough failure to be furious about it. "Well, well," Leather Jacket announced to the room, his words slurring together. "Fancy fucking place. You serve real people here or just wise guy wannabes?" Marco materialized from somewhere, his manager's smile stretched thin. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight, but I'd be happy to recommend. We don't want recommendations." Leather Jacket's eyes were scanning the room, and Lena's stomach dropped when she realized what he was looking for. "We want to see if the stories are true. They say Dante Moretti eats here with his killer dog. That true?" The temperature in the room plummeted. Lena watched Moretti's table from across the dining room. The boss hadn't moved, but both his lieutenants had shifted, their jackets falling open in ways that suggested rehearsed access to hardware. Brutus had gone absolutely rigid, his body so tense it looked like stone. "Sir, I need to ask you to leave," Marco said, his voice climbing an octave. Leather Jacket ignored him, pushing deeper into the restaurant. His friends followed, emboldened by alcohol and stupidity. "Come on, Moretti, show us the famous murder mutt, or is he just for show like half the tough guys in this city?" Lena saw it happening before anyone else did. Leather Jacket grabbed a heavy rocks glass from the nearest table, still half full of whiskey, and hurled it toward Moretti's corner booth. The glass didn't hit anyone. It exploded against the wall 6 feet from the table, spraying glass shards and amber liquid across Italian marble. But the sound, sharp, percussive, violent, was everything Brutus's traumatized nervous system had been waiting for. The Pitbull detonated. 1 second he was sitting, the next he was airborne, 140 pounds of muscle and teeth and trauma-driven rage launching toward the threat with speed that didn't seem possible for something that size. The chain leash snapped like thread. Someone screamed. Moretti's lieutenants had weapons coming up, their faces showing the cold calculation of men prepared to put the dog down before he tore through civilians and created the kind of headlines that brought federal attention nobody wanted. "Wait!" The word ripped out of Lena's throat before her brain could stop it. She was already moving, her body acting on 18 months of observation and 15 years of instinct from her father's rescue work. Brutus had covered half the distance to Leather Jacket, who'd sobered up instantly and was scrambling backward with genuine terror painting his face, when Lena stepped directly into the dog's path. Every tactical part of her brain screamed that this was suicide, but the part that had watched this animal for 18 months, that had seen the fear beneath the fury, knew something else. "Brutus, down!" She didn't shout. Shouting would spike his adrenaline higher. Instead, Lena dropped her voice into a register she hadn't used since her father died. Low, steady, absolutely certain. The tone you used with terrified animals who needed an anchor more than a command. Brutus skidded to a stop 6 feet from her, his massive head swinging toward this new variable. His lips were peeled back from teeth that could crush bone, his entire body vibrating with violent energy. Lena went immediately still. Not frozen. That was fear. And dogs could smell fear. This was deliberate stillness, the kind that communicated calm instead of threat. She kept her hands low and visible, her breathing slow and deep, her eyes soft, not staring directly at him, which would read as challenge, but not looking away either, which would read as prey. "You're okay," she said, her voice carrying that same low steadiness. "Nobody's going to hurt you. You're safe." Behind her, someone hissed, "What the hell is she doing?" Moretti's voice cut through, quiet and absolute. "Nobody moves. Nobody breathes." Lena took one slow step forward. Brutus's head dropped slightly, his eyes tracking her movement, but his body language shifting, less offensive aggression, more confusion. His breathing was still rapid, his pupils blown wide with panic, but something in Lena's approach was penetrating the trauma response. She'd seen this before years ago, with a German shepherd that had been beaten so badly it had forgotten how to trust anything human. Her father had spent 3 months teaching that dog that not all hands struck, not all voices threatened. The lesson had stuck with Lena. Trauma wasn't about the present moment. Trauma was about every moment that taught you the world was dangerous, and the only way to survive was to strike first. "Hey, big guy," Lena murmured, taking another step. "I know you're scared. That sound, the glass breaking, that reminded you of bad things, didn't it?" Brutus's ears flickered forward, then back. His tail remained rigid, but the muscles in his shoulders were starting to unlock incrementally. "But this isn't that place," Lena continued, her voice steady as a heartbeat. "This is different. Look at me. No weapons, no hitting, no pain. Just me, talking to you like you're not a monster." She was close enough now to see the scars hidden beneath his coat. Old burns, healed fractures, the kind of damage that didn't happen from normal dogfights. This animal had been tortured into violence, trained through agony to associate every stimulus with survival. Lena extended her hand, palm down, moving so slowly it looked like meditation. "You don't have to hurt anyone," she said softly. "You can choose something different." Brutus's breathing started to slow. His body remained tense, but the vibrating fury was draining away, replaced by something that looked like exhaustion. He leaned forward, not lunging, but investigating, and sniffed her extended hand with the careful precision of an animal trying to reconcile its training with new information. Then, impossibly, he sat. The restaurant remained frozen, every person holding their breath like they'd witnessed something supernatural. Lena heard someone whisper, "Jesus Christ," but she didn't break her focus. She crouched down to Brutus's level, still moving with deliberate slowness, and placed one hand gently on his head. The Pitbull leaned into the touch like he'd been starving for it. Lena felt something break in her chest. Not fear, but recognition. This wasn't a monster. This was a prisoner who'd learned to survive by becoming what his captors demanded, and who'd forgotten he could be anything else. "Good boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears the way her father had taught her. Firm enough to feel like massage, gentle enough to communicate safety. "You're such a good boy." Brutus's tail gave a tiny, uncertain wag. Behind her, Lena heard movement. She turned her head slightly and saw Moretti standing now, his face showing an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, maybe, or something more complicated. His lieutenant still had hands near their weapons, but they weren't drawing. Leather jacket and his friends had disappeared. Probably ran the moment Brutus sat down. Marco was staring at Lena like she'd just walked on water. "How?" Moretti said, his voice carrying genuine curiosity beneath its controlled surface. "Did you do that?" Lena stayed crouched, keeping one hand on Brutus's head while the dog pressed against her leg like an exhausted child. "He's not aggressive. He's terrified. There's a difference. Everyone says he's dangerous." "He is dangerous," Lena agreed, finally looking up at Moretti directly. "But dangerous and evil aren't the same thing. He's dangerous because someone made him that way. Taught him that violence was the only option. But that's not who he is underneath. That's just what he learned to survive." Something shifted in Moretti's expression. "You can see that just by looking at him?" I grew up around rescue dogs, Lena said. My father ran a rehabilitation program for animals nobody else wanted. The ones with bite histories, trauma responses, fear aggression. He'd take them in and show them that not all humans were threats. She paused, feeling Brutus's breathing slow further under her touch. This boy has all the signs. The hypervigilance, the explosive reactions to sudden stimuli, the way he calms down the moment someone shows him genuine calm instead of fear or aggression. He's been trained for violence, but he's wired for something else. Moretti studied her for a long moment, and Lena realized she was being assessed by someone who'd built an empire on reading people accurately. What's your name? Lena. Lena Hart. Lena. He said it like he was testing how it felt. You work here long? 18 months. And in 18 months, you're the first person who's ever looked at my dog and seen something other than a weapon. It wasn't a question, but Lena answered anyway. Most people see what they're afraid of. They don't look deeper. Brutus shifted against her, his massive head resting on her knee now, his eyes half closed. The transformation was so complete it looked fake, except Lena could feel his heartbeat slowing under her hand, could see the tension bleeding out of muscles that had probably been locked tight for years. Moretti crouched down beside them, moving carefully, and Brutus's eyes opened, but he didn't pull away from Lena's touch. I got him 2 years ago, Moretti said quietly, and Lena realized this was information he didn't share often. From a fighting ring we shut down. Most of the dogs were too far gone. They had to be put down. But Brutus, he paused. The trainer said he was special, undefeated, perfect weapon. Perfect victim, Lena corrected gently. They broke him into being a weapon, but the fact that he's sitting here right now, calm under my hand instead of tearing through this restaurant, proves he's got more in him than just violence. Can he be fixed? The question was asked with the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned not to hope for things too openly. Lena looked at Brutus, really looked at him, seeing past the scars and the reputation to the exhausted animal underneath. I don't know, maybe. It would take time, patience, and someone who understands trauma conditioning. You can't just train it out. You have to rebuild the neural pathways, create new associations, teach him that the world isn't what he learned it was. Could you do it? Lena blinked, startled. What? Could you fix him? Moretti's eyes were direct, intelligent, and absolutely serious. You clearly know what you're doing. You just stopped what 3 trained handlers couldn't control. Could you rehabilitate him? I'm a waitress, Lena said carefully. Not a professional trainer. What I know comes from watching my father work. And that was years ago. But could you do it? The weight of the question pressed down on Lena's shoulders. She thought about Sophie, about the medical bills stacking up like accusations, about the experimental treatment that was the only thing keeping her sister alive, and the $40,000 she didn't have for the next round. She thought about how desperately she needed a miracle. But she also thought about the animal under her hand and what it would mean to promise something she might not be able to deliver. I don't know, she said honestly. I'd have to spend time with him, observe his triggers, understand his specific trauma responses. Every dog is different. What worked for the animals my father rehabilitated might not work for Brutus. And there's no guarantee. Sometimes the damage is too deep, and the best you can do is manage it, not cure it. Moretti nodded slowly, like he appreciated the honesty more than false confidence. But you'd try. If I took this on, I'd give it everything I have, Lena said. But Mr. Moretti, I need to be clear. I'm not qualified for this. I'm not a licensed behaviorist or a professional trainer. What I have is experience and instinct, and it's more than anyone else has offered. Moretti stood up, and Lena found herself looking up at a man who commanded rooms with his presence alone. I'll have someone contact you tomorrow. We'll discuss terms. Terms? If you're going to work with Brutus, you'll need to be available regularly. That means we'd need to work around your schedule here, or... He paused. We could make other arrangements. Lena's survival instincts were screaming warnings, but her desperation was shouting louder. What kind of arrangements? Let me think about it overnight, Moretti said. In the meantime, he pulled out his wallet and handed her a business card. Heavy stock, minimal design, just a phone number. Call this number if you need anything. And Lena? Yes? Thank you. for seeing him as more than what he's been forced to be. Then he was moving away, his lieutenants falling into formation around him. Brutus stood reluctantly, looking back at Lena with something that might have been confusion or might have been hope. She couldn't tell which. The moment the Moretti crew left, the restaurant exploded with sound. Marco was at her side immediately, his face cycling through terror and relief and something like anger. "Are you insane?" he hissed. "Do you have any idea what could have happened? That dog could have killed you. Moretti could have—" "But he didn't," Lena interrupted, her legs suddenly shaking as the adrenaline crashed. "The dog didn't attack, and Moretti just offered me something. I don't know what yet, but something." Maria appeared with a glass of water, pressing it into Lena's hands. "Girl, you just stepped between a mafia boss's attack dog and potential prey. You either have titanium ovaries or a death wish." "Neither," Lena said, drinking the water because her mouth had gone desert dry. "I just saw an animal in pain and knew how to help." But as she finished her shift, moving through the remaining tables on autopilot while her brain processed what had just happened, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped off a cliff without checking if there was ground below. She left Corso at midnight, her feet aching and her mind racing. The subway ride back to her apartment in Queens took 40 minutes, giving her plenty of time to spiral through every possible outcome of Moretti's promised contact. What if he wanted her to move the dog to a training facility? She couldn't afford to quit her job. What if he wanted her to work with Brutus at his estate, wherever that was? She had Sophie to think about. Her sister was staying with their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, during Lena's shifts. But that arrangement was already stretched thin. What if this was all some kind of test, and she'd just painted a target on her back by suggesting the most feared enforcer dog in Manhattan was actually just traumatized? Lena's phone buzzed as she climbed the stairs to her third-floor walk-up. A text from an unknown number. Memorial Sloan Kettering called. Sophie's next treatment is scheduled for Friday. They need payment confirmation by Wednesday. 2 days, $40,000. Impossible. Lena let herself into the apartment and found Sophie asleep on the couch, her bald head covered with the knitted cap Lena had made her last month. Her sister looked impossibly small, impossibly fragile, like a strong wind could carry her away. The medical equipment, the IV stand, the pill organizers, the thick binder of treatment protocols dominated their tiny living room like occupying forces. Lena sat down on the edge of the couch, careful not to wake Sophie, and let herself feel the full weight of their situation. She was drowning. They were drowning. And she'd just gambled their last hope on a conversation with a crime boss who might call tomorrow or might forget she existed. Her phone buzzed again. Different number. The text read, "This is Vincent, Mr. Moretti's associate. He'd like to meet with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. A car will pick you up at your address. Compensation for your time will be provided regardless of outcome. Respond to confirm." Lena stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. This was the cliff edge. This was the moment where she decided if she was desperate enough to step into a world she'd spent 18 months serving but never joining. She looked at Sophie, at the medical bills stacked on their kitchen counter, at the reality of their situation. Then she typed, "Confirmed." The response came immediately. "Car will arrive at 9:45 a.m. Dress comfortably." Lena set her phone down and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of panic. Hands shaking, breath coming fast, the full understanding of what she might have just agreed to washing over her like ice water. Then she stood up, checked that Sophie was comfortable, and went to her bedroom to figure out what dress comfortably meant when meeting with organized crime. She didn't sleep that night. At 9:43 a.m., a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up in front of her building. Lena watched from her window, her stomach performing gymnastics. She dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, comfortable but not sloppy, professional but not trying too hard. Sophie was at school, safe in Mrs. Chen's supervision for pickup. Lena had left a note explaining she had a job interview and would be back by afternoon. It wasn't technically a lie. The driver who emerged from the SUV was built like a professional linebacker, but he opened the rear door with surprising courtesy. "Ms. Hart, I'm Vincent. Mr. Moretti is looking forward to speaking with you." Lena climbed into the SUV, her survival instincts cataloging details. Bulletproof glass, reinforced doors, complete privacy partition between front and rear seats. This wasn't a car. This was a mobile fortress. The drive took them out of Queens, across the bridge, and into New Jersey. Lena watched the city give way to suburbs, then to something more rural, estates with gates and security cameras, and the kind of privacy that money and menace could buy. They turned onto a private road, passed through gates that looked like they could stop a tank, and pulled up to a house that made mansion feel inadequate. Moretti's estate was beautiful in the way powerful things often were, all clean lines and strategic design, modern architecture that suggested taste and resources in equal measure. The grounds were immaculate, the security subtle but omnipresent. Vincent opened her door. "Mr. Moretti is waiting in the garden. Follow me, please." Lena followed him through the house. Marble floors, art that was probably worth more than her entire building, the quiet hum of wealth so complete it didn't need to announce itself, and out to a stone patio overlooking landscaped grounds. Dante Moretti sat at an outdoor table, dressed casually in dark slacks and a white shirt, looking significantly less intimidating than he had at the restaurant. Brutus lay beside him, the dog's head resting on enormous paws. When Brutus saw Lena, his tail started wagging. "Ms. Hart," Moretti said, standing. "Thank you for coming. Please sit. Can I offer you coffee? Breakfast?" "Coffee would be good," Lena said, settling into the chair across from him while her brain struggled to reconcile the polite host with the reputation she'd heard whispered at Corso. Moretti poured from a French press, handed her a cup that was probably designer and definitely expensive. "I'll be direct," he said. "I've spent the last 18 hours thinking about what you said, about Brutus being terrified rather than aggressive, about trauma versus evil." Lena sipped her coffee and waited. "I've had 3 professional trainers work with him," Moretti continued. "All of them use dominance-based methods, alpha theory, punishment-based conditioning, shock collars. None of it worked. It just made him more reactive, more dangerous. I was starting to think he was unsalvageable." "He's not," Lena said quietly. "But the methods you described would only deepen his trauma. He doesn't need to be dominated. He needs to learn that the world isn't always threatening. Can you teach him that?" "I can try, but it won't be fast and it won't be easy. Undoing years of trauma takes time." Moretti nodded slowly. "What would you need?" "Time with him. Regular, consistent sessions where I can observe his triggers and start building new associations. Access to his history, if you have it, where he came from, what specific training methods were used, any medical records. And patience on your end. This isn't like training a puppy. This is rehabilitation, and there will be setbacks." "I can provide all of that." Moretti paused. "But there's a complication. Brutus goes everywhere with me. My work requires constant movement, meetings, travel, appearances. Taking him to a training facility isn't an option for security reasons." Lena understood. Men in Moretti's position didn't leave their animals with strangers who might turn them into leverage. "So you'd need someone who could travel with you," she said carefully. "Work with him in different environments, different situations." "Yes, which brings me to my proposal." Moretti's eyes were direct, assessing. "I'd like to hire you as Brutus's full-time handler. You'd live here at the estate, work with him daily, accompany us when necessary. In exchange, I'll pay you a salary of $15,000 per month, plus room and board, full health insurance, and—" He paused. "I understand you have a sister, Sophie, 15, currently undergoing leukemia treatment at Sloan Kettering." Lena's blood went cold. "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know about people before I trust them with things that matter to me," Moretti said simply. "Your sister's treatment is expensive, experimental, not fully covered by insurance. You're drowning in medical debt, and the next round of treatment is scheduled for Friday with payment due Wednesday." He slid an envelope across the table. Lena opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a check made out to Memorial Sloan Kettering for $40,000, with Sophie Hart's patient number in the memo line. "Consider it a signing bonus," Moretti said. "Enough for this round and the next 2. If you agree to work with Brutus, your sister's entire treatment will be covered. All of it, including experimental trials, hospital stays, medications, everything. I have connections at Sloan Kettering. She'll get the best care available." Lena stared at the check, feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. This was salvation. This was Sophie's life, handed to her on expensive paper stock. This was also a deal with the devil, or at least someone the world had labeled as such. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this? I'm nobody. Brutus is just a dog. This is too much." "Brutus isn't just a dog to me," Moretti interrupted, and for the first time, Lena heard genuine emotion in his voice. "He's the only living thing in my world that doesn't want something from me, doesn't fear me, doesn't calculate angles. He's honest. And if there's a chance he could be more than what he's been made into, I want to give him that chance." He paused, and Lena saw something vulnerable flicker across his face before the control reasserted itself. "And maybe," Moretti continued quietly, "I want to see if things that have been broken can actually be fixed." Lena looked at Brutus, who was watching her with those dark, intelligent eyes. The dog who everyone called a monster, but who'd sat calmly under her touch and wagged his tail when she arrived. She looked at the check that represented Sophie's survival. She looked at Dante Moretti, who commanded an empire built on violence but was asking her, a waitress with no credentials, to teach his dog that the world could be gentle. "If I do this," Lena said slowly, "I need some things to be clear. I'm not joining your organization. I'm not getting involved in your business. I work with Brutus, period. And if at any point I feel like this arrangement is putting my sister in danger, I walk away." "Agreed. And you have to trust my methods. No more dominance training, no punishment-based conditioning, no override from other trainers. If you hire me, you trust my approach or we don't do this at all." "Agreed." Lena took a deep breath. "Then yes, I'll do it." Moretti extended his hand across the table. When Lena shook it, his grip was firm but not crushing, the handshake of someone who had nothing to prove. "Welcome to the estate, Ms. Hart. Vincent will help you move your things this week. Take whatever time you need to arrange care for your sister during your working hours." "She can come with me," Lena said before she could stop herself. "If I'm living here, she comes too. Non-negotiable." She waited for the refusal, for the explanation about security and liability and all the reasons why bringing a sick teenager into a crime boss's home was impossible. Instead, Moretti just nodded. "There's a guest house on the property, 3 bedrooms, full kitchen, completely private. You and Sophie can stay there. I'll have medical equipment moved in and we can arrange for nursing staff if needed." Lena felt tears threatening and forced them back. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Moretti said, but there was something almost like a smile at the corner of his mouth. "You haven't started working with Brutus. You might decide I'm not paying you enough." As if summoned by his name, Brutus stood and padded over to Lena, resting his massive head on her knee with a gentleness that contradicted everything the world believed about him. Lena placed her hand on his head and felt his tail start to wag again. Looking into those dark eyes, she made a silent promise. "I'll help you remember who you were before they taught you to be a weapon. I'll show you that safety is possible." She just hoped she could keep that promise without losing herself in the process. Moving into Dante Moretti's estate took 3 days, though Lena's entire life fit into 6 boxes and 2 suitcases. What took time was convincing Sophie that this wasn't temporary charity or dangerous desperation, but a real job with real stability, even if that stability came wrapped in bulletproof glass and security cameras that tracked every sparrow crossing the property line. "You're going to live with a Mafia boss," Sophie said flatly, sitting on their apartment couch with her knitted cap pulled low over her bare scalp. At 15, her sister had developed the kind of brutal honesty that chemotherapy and mortality seemed to cultivate. "Lena, this is insane, even for you." "I'm going to work with a dog," Lena corrected, folding her clothes into a duffel bag, while Mrs. Chen watched from the doorway with the expression of someone who'd witnessed many bad decisions but knew better than to interfere. "The fact that the dog's owner happens to be Dante Moretti is incidental." "Nothing about Dante Moretti is incidental. The man runs half of Manhattan's—" Sophie paused, searching for the right euphemism. "Import-export business." "Sophie." "What? I read the news. I know what import-export means when newspapers use it in quotation marks." Sophie's thin arms crossed over her chest. "This is dangerous." "So is leukemia," Lena said quietly, sitting down beside her sister. And one of those things I can actually do something about. Mr. Moretti is paying for your treatment, Soph. All of it. Every round, every medication, every hospital stay. You can finish the experimental trial without us having to choose between rent and chemotherapy. Sophie's eyes filled with tears she was too stubborn to let fall. I don't want you getting hurt because of me. You're not the reason I'm doing this, Lena lied, because sometimes love required dishonesty. I'm doing this because I'm good at working with traumatized animals, and Brutus needs help. The fact that it also saves our lives financially is just a bonus. You always were a terrible liar. But Sophie leaned against Lena's shoulder, her body feeling too light, too fragile. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me that if anything feels wrong, you'll leave. I promise, Lena said, and meant it. The guest house Moretti had mentioned turned out to be nicer than any apartment Lena had ever lived in. 2 stories of clean, modern design, 3 bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms, a kitchen with appliances that looked like they belonged in culinary magazines, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens so perfect they seemed photoshopped. The medical equipment arrived the same day Lena and Sophie did: a hospital-grade bed with adjustable settings, IV stands, monitoring equipment, and a locked cabinet stocked with every medication on Sophie's treatment plan. A visiting nurse named Patricia would come 3 times a week to handle the complex medical procedures Lena wasn't qualified to manage. This is excessive, Sophie whispered, standing in her new bedroom with its pale blue walls and views of rose gardens. Lena, this is too much. Get used to excessive, Lena replied, unpacking her sister's clothes into a dresser that was probably worth more than their entire queen's apartment. We're living on an estate owned by a man who considers bulletproof SUVs basic transportation. Their first dinner at the estate came with an invitation delivered by Vincent. Mr. Moretti would like them to join him in the main house at 7, if they were comfortable doing so. Casual dress, nothing formal. Lena almost declined, but Sophie surprised her by saying yes before she could formulate a polite refusal. What? I want to meet the mob boss paying for my cancer treatment, Sophie said with the kind of dark humor that had become her coping mechanism. Besides, you're going to be working with his dog every day. Might as well establish that we're not terrified of him. I'm a little terrified of him, Lena admitted. Good. Means you're paying attention. They walked to the main house at 6:55, Lena's hand finding Sophie's automatically. The evening air smelled like jasmine and fresh-cut grass, the grounds lit with subtle landscape lighting that made everything look staged for a magazine shoot. Vincent met them at the door, his linebacker frame somehow less intimidating when he smiled. Ms. Hart, Sophie. Mr. Moretti is in the dining room. This way, please. The dining room could have seated 20 comfortably, but was set for just 3. One end of a long table with good china and cloth napkins, and the kind of quiet elegance that came from money so old it didn't need to announce itself. Dante Moretti stood when they entered, and Lena noticed he'd dressed down to match his invitation, dark jeans and a simple black sweater that somehow still looked expensive. Brutus lay beside his chair, and the dog's tail started wagging the moment he saw Lena. Sophie, Moretti said, moving around the table to shake her hand with surprising gentleness. I'm glad you could join us. How are you feeling? Sophie blinked, clearly not expecting the question. Like I have leukemia, she said bluntly, then seemed to remember this was her host and added, But the new room is nice. Thank you. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Moretti's face. Honesty, I appreciate that. Please sit. Dinner should be ready shortly. The meal was prepared by Moretti's personal chef, a woman named Rosa, who emerged from the kitchen with pasta that smelled like everything good Lena had ever imagined Italy could produce. Homemade ravioli and sage butter sauce, Caesar salad with actual anchovies, bread that was still warm from the oven. Rosa doesn't cook for many people anymore, Moretti said, serving Sophie first with the kind of practiced courtesy that suggested old-world manners learned young. But when I told her we had guests, she insisted on making something special. It's amazing, Sophie said around a mouthful of ravioli, her appetite, which had been diminished by chemo, suddenly returning with enthusiasm. Like, really amazing. Lena watched her sister eat with the kind of relief that probably showed too clearly on her face. Sophie had lost so much weight over the past year, every pound a visible surrender to the disease. Seeing her enjoy food felt like winning something small but crucial, Lena tells me you're interested in veterinary medicine, Moretti said to Sophie, and Lena wondered when she'd mentioned that, then remembered the background check, the way Moretti made it his business to know things about people he brought into his world. Sophie nodded, some of her earlier boldness returning. Before I got sick, yeah, I wanted to work with rescue animals like my dad used to, but that was before. She gestured vaguely at her bald head, her thin frame. Now I just want to make it to 16. The bluntness of it hung in the air like smoke. Moretti didn't flinch, didn't offer empty platitudes about positive thinking or fighting spirits. Instead, he said simply, "Then we'll make sure you get there. Patricia is one of the best oncology nurses in the state, and I have connections at Sloan Kettering that can expedite any treatment you need. You focus on healing. Let us handle the logistics." Sophie studied him with the two old eyes of someone who'd learned to read people through hospital stays and bad news delivered with careful voices. "Why are you doing this? I mean, really, Lena's good with dogs, but this seems like a lot for just a dog trainer." "Sophie," Lena started, but Moretti held up a hand. "It's a fair question," he said, meeting Sophie's gaze directly. "The truth is, most people in my life want something from me. Money, protection, status, power. They smile and they scheme and they calculate angles. It's exhausting." He paused, glancing down at Brutus. "Your sister looked at my dog, who everyone else sees as a weapon, and saw a traumatized animal who needed help. She didn't calculate an angle. She just responded with competence and compassion. That kind of honesty is rare in my world, worth investing in." "So this is an investment?" Sophie pressed. "This is me hoping that things broken by cruelty can be made whole through kindness," Moretti said quietly. "For Brutus. And maybe for other things too." Something passed between them then, an understanding that Lena didn't fully grasp, but Sophie seemed to recognize. Her sister nodded slowly and went back to her pasta. The rest of dinner passed with surprisingly normal conversation. Moretti asked about Sophie's favorite subjects in school, discussed the estate's gardens, even laughed when Sophie told an embarrassing story about Lena accidentally dyeing her hair green in high school. By the time Rosa brought out tiramisu for dessert, Lena had almost forgotten she was having dinner with a man whose reputation included words like ruthless and dangerous. Almost. After dinner, Moretti walked them back to the guest house, Brutus padding beside him on a loose leash. The night had turned cool, stars visible in a way they never were in Queens. "Tomorrow we'll start the real work," Moretti said when they reached the guest house door. "I've cleared my morning schedule. You'll have 4 hours with Brutus, undisturbed." "I'll need access to his veterinary records," Lena said, shifting into professional mode. "Any documentation of his training history, medical scans, behavioral notes. And I want to examine him physically, check for old injuries, pain points, anything that might be contributing to his stress responses. Vincent will have everything ready by 8 a.m. Moretti paused, and in the porch light, Lena could see the careful controls slip slightly. "Can you really help him?" The vulnerability in the question caught her off guard. This wasn't the crime boss everyone whispered about at Corso. This was someone who cared about his dog and was desperately hoping for something better than management and containment. "I don't know yet," Lena said honestly, "but I'm going to try like hell." Moretti nodded, then surprised her by crouching down and scratching Brutus behind the ears with genuine affection. "Be good for Lena," he murmured to the dog. "She's here to help." Brutus's tail wagged, and Lena felt something tighten in her chest at the sight of this feared man showing tenderness to an animal everyone else considered a monster. After they left, Sophie flopped onto the guest house couch with dramatic flair. "Okay, so he's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know, more obviously evil? Gold chains and cigars and casual murder threats?" Sophie pulled her knitted cap off, scratching at her bare scalp. "He seems almost normal." "He's not normal," Lena said firmly, locking the door and checking the windows out of habit, even though they were on a secured estate. "He's dangerous, Sophie. Just because he's polite doesn't mean he's safe." "I know." Sophie's voice went softer. "But he looked at me like I was a person, not a tragedy. That was nice." Lena sat beside her sister, pulling her close. "Yeah, it was." That night, Lena lay in her new bedroom, which was 3 times the size of her old one, and stared at the ceiling while her brain cataloged everything that could go wrong. She'd moved herself and her dying sister into the home of a man whose business involved violence and illegality. She'd accepted money that came from sources she definitely didn't want to examine too closely. She'd agreed to rehabilitate a dog that had been trained to kill. And somehow, despite all of that, she felt something that had been absent for 18 months. Hope. She fell asleep to the sound of Sophie's even breathing through the baby monitor, a concession to worry that Sophie tolerated because she understood Lena needed the reassurance, and dreamed of dogs with kind eyes and men with dangerous hands. Morning came with autumn sunlight and the smell of coffee from the kitchen, where Sophie was already awake and raiding the fully stocked refrigerator with the enthusiasm of someone whose appetite had been medically suppressed for months. "There's like 6 different kinds of juice," Sophie called out. "An actual fresh fruit, not the canned stuff from the hospital." "Don't make yourself sick," Lena warned, pouring coffee from the pot Sophie had apparently figured out how to operate. "Your stomach needs time to adjust." "My stomach is tired of bland food and wants to remember what taste is." At 8 a.m. sharp, Vincent arrived with a thick folder of documents and Brutus on a reinforced leash. The dog's tail started wagging the moment he saw Lena, his entire rear end wiggling with excitement. "All of Brutus's records," Vincent said, handing over the folder. "Medical history, training documentation from his previous owner, behavioral notes from the 3 trainers Mr. Moretti hired. There's also a detailed account of the fighting ring where he was recovered if you want background on his trauma source." "Thank you." Lena took the folder, its weight substantial, in her hands. "And Moretti? Where is he?" "Morning meetings in the city. He'll be back by noon. The estate grounds are yours. Use whatever space you need for training. If you need anything, I'm available by phone." Vincent handed Brutus's leash to Lena, and the dog immediately pressed against her leg. "He's been fed and exercised. Ready when you are." After Vincent left, Lena spread the folder contents across the guest house dining table, while Sophie watched from the couch with her juice and curiosity. "Can I help?" Sophie asked. "You can read through the medical records and flag anything that looks like chronic pain or old injuries that might affect his behavior," Lena said, sorting documents into piles. "I need to understand what we're working with." What they were working with, it turned out, was a nightmare wrapped in fur. Brutus's veterinary records showed a litany of old injuries: 3 healed fractures in his ribs, a previously broken front leg that had set slightly wrong, burn scars across his back and shoulders, multiple teeth that had been cracked and required capping, and evidence of electrical shock damage consistent with training collar abuse. His previous owner, a man named Victor Calabrese, who ran underground fighting rings before Moretti's organization shut him down, had kept meticulous training logs that detailed systematic torture designed to create aggression. Lena read the logs with mounting horror. Brutus had been starved, beaten, shocked, and forced to fight other dogs from the age of 8 months. The wins were rewarded with food. The losses were punished with violence. By the time he was 2 years old, he'd been conditioned to view every interaction as potential combat, every stranger as a threat. "This is sick," Sophie said quietly, reading over Lena's shoulder. "How is he not completely insane?" "He kind of is," Lena replied, flipping to the behavioral notes from Moretti's trainers. "Look at this. Reactive aggression towards sudden movements, hypervigilance in new environments, inability to relax even in supposedly safe spaces, explosive responses to perceived threats. These aren't behavior problems. These are PTSD symptoms." "Can dogs get PTSD?" "Absolutely. Trauma doesn't care about species." Lena stood up, looking at Brutus where he lay beside the couch, his eyes tracking her movements with that constant wariness. "The question is whether we can help him develop new neural pathways that override the trauma conditioning." She spent the next hour doing a physical examination, checking Brutus for pain responses, range of motion issues, and areas of sensitivity. The dog tolerated her touch with surprising patience, though he flinched whenever her hands approached certain scars. "You've been through hell," Lena murmured, finding a spot on his chest where old burn tissue had healed in rough patterns. "But you're safe now. I'm going to teach you what safe feels like." Brutus's tail gave a tentative wag. The training work started simply. Too simply for what the previous trainers had probably expected, but Lena knew that rebuilding trust required starting from absolute basics. She took Brutus to a quiet corner of the estate grounds, away from the main house and potential triggers, and began with the most fundamental skill, teaching him to exist calmly in space. No commands, no expectations. Just Lena sitting on the grass, reading aloud from a book, while Brutus learned that proximity to humans didn't always mean demands or danger. 30 minutes in, the dog lowered himself to the ground with a sigh that sounded like relief. Sophie watched from the guest house window, her phone in hand, probably texting friends about her sister's weird new job. Lena caught her eye and waved. Sophie waved back, grinning. By noon, when Moretti's SUV pulled through the gates, Lena had completed 3 training sessions, each focused on building positive associations with previously triggering stimuli. Brutus had progressed from flinching at dropped tennis balls to watching them bounce with only moderate tension. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Moretti found her in the garden. Brutus sprawled in the grass beside her with his head on her lap. "How's it going?" he asked, and Lena heard the careful hope beneath the casual question. "Better than expected," she said honestly. "He's incredibly smart, which helps. But Moretti, his records, what Calabrese did to him, it's worse than I thought." "I know." Moretti's jaw tightened. "Calabrese won't be doing it to any other dogs." The finality in his tone suggested Calabrese's underground fighting operation had been shut down permanently and possibly fatally, but Lena didn't ask for details she didn't want confirmed. "The good news is Brutus's behavior is responsive to positive conditioning," Lena continued. "He wants to trust people. He's just been taught that trust gets you hurt. We need to slowly, consistently prove that's not true anymore." "How long will it take?" "Months. Maybe a year or more for deep reconditioning. And there might always be some triggers that cause flashback responses. Trauma doesn't just disappear, but we can teach him management skills, build his confidence, create new default behaviors that aren't rooted in fear." Moretti crouched down, and Brutus lifted his head to nuzzle his hand. "Months is fine. A year is fine. Whatever it takes." "There's something else," Lena said carefully. "Your men, the ones who interact with Brutus regularly, they need to understand that punishment-based handling will undo everything we're building. No yelling, no jerking his leash, no intimidation tactics. Everyone needs to be on the same page. I'll make it clear. And when you take him to meetings, restaurants, public spaces, those are high-stress environments. We'll need to work up to that gradually, with positive associations and—" "Lena," Moretti's voice was gentle but firm. "I trust you. Tell me what needs to happen, and I'll make it happen. You're the expert here." The simple statement of trust caught her off guard. In her old life, she'd been a waitress whose opinions barely registered. Here, she was being given complete authority over something that clearly mattered deeply to a man whose word could move money and muscle across the city. "Okay," she said. "Then here's what I need." The conversation continued for an hour, Lena outlining her training plan, while Moretti listened with the focus of someone used to processing complex information and making strategic decisions. He asked intelligent questions, pushed back when he didn't understand the reasoning, and ultimately agreed to every modification she requested. As they talked, Lena noticed something shift in how Moretti looked at her, less like hired help, more like a valued consultant whose expertise deserved respect. It should have been empowering. Instead, it felt dangerous, like stepping onto ice that might crack under increased weight. That night, Lena was reading in bed when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Nothing good came from unknown numbers after 10 p.m., but something made her answer. "Lena Hart?" The voice was male, vaguely familiar, edged with something that made her skin prickle. "Who is this?" "Grant Voss." "Remember me?" Lena sat up sharply, her heart rate spiking. Grant Voss, her ex-boyfriend from 3 years ago, the relationship that had ended badly when she discovered he'd been using her neighbor's Wi-Fi to run background checks on people for reasons he'd never adequately explained. She'd broken it off, changed her number, and thought she'd successfully excised him from her life. "How did you get this number?" she demanded. "I'm a federal investigator now, Lena. I can get any number I want." His tone carried smugness like cologne. "Congratulations on your new job, by the way. Working for Dante Moretti. That's quite the career pivot from waitressing." Ice formed in Lena's stomach. "What do you want, Grant?" "To offer you an opportunity. See, The Bureau has been trying to get close to Moretti for years, but he's careful, keeps his organization tight, his people loyal. Then you waltz in, move on to his estate, get access to his home, his schedule, his private moments. That's valuable access, Lena. No. The word came out flat and absolute. Absolutely not. You haven't heard my offer yet. I don't need to. I'm not spying on my employer for you or anyone else. Grant's laugh was ugly. Your employer, that's cute. You mean the crime boss who's paying for your sister's cancer treatment? The one whose money is probably funding Sophie's experimental trial right now? Lena's grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles went white. Here's the thing, Lena. That money, Sophie's treatment funding, it came from Moretti's accounts. Accounts we've been watching. If someone were to flag those transactions as suspicious, launch an investigation into the source of those funds, well, hospitals get nervous about accepting money that might be tied to organized crime. They freeze accounts. They suspend treatments pending investigation. And investigations can take months. Does Sophie have months? The threat was crystal clear, wrapped in bureaucratic language that made it sound almost reasonable. You son of a bitch, Lena breathed. I'm offering you a choice, Grant continued smoothly. Feed me information about Moretti's operations. Nothing dramatic, just details about his schedule, his meetings, people who visit the estate. And Sophie's treatment continues uninterrupted. Or refuse, and I make some calls that will bury her funding in red tape she won't survive. That's extortion. That's leverage, ma. And you're going to take the deal, Lena, because we both know you'd do anything to keep your sister alive. He paused. I'll call you in 3 days for your first report. Think carefully about your answer. The line went dead. Lena sat in the dark, her phone still pressed to her ear, feeling like the floor had dropped away beneath her. Grant Voss, corrupt, manipulative Grant Voss, had just turned her salvation into a trap. If she refused to cooperate, Sophie's treatment got frozen. If she agreed, she betrayed the man who'd saved her sister's life and likely put herself in mortal danger when Moretti inevitably discovered the betrayal. There was no good choice, just gradations of terrible. Her hands were shaking when she finally set the phone down. She wanted to scream, to cry, to rage against the unfairness of a world that kept finding new ways to hurt her sister. But Sophie was sleeping in the next room, safe and stable, and finally getting the treatment she needed. Lena would protect that, whatever it cost. She spent the next 3 days in careful performance, working with Brutus during the day while her mind spun through scenarios at night. She could tell Moretti about Grant's threat, but what if he decided she was too much of a liability and cut her loose? She could try to find evidence of Grant's corruption and use it as counter-leverage, but how would a former waitress investigate a federal agent? She could refuse to cooperate and hope Grant was bluffing, but what if he wasn't, and Sophie paid the price? Every option felt like stepping into quicksand. On the third day, while running Brutus through desensitization exercises in the estate's south garden, Lena noticed something odd. A small metallic glint in the rose bushes, partially hidden but catching the afternoon sun. She walked over casually, letting Brutus investigate nearby flowers while she examined the object. It was a surveillance device. Professional grade, the kind that transmitted audio and possibly video back to whoever had planted it. Lena's blood ran cold. This wasn't random. This was targeted, sophisticated, and positioned to monitor the main house's outdoor areas where Moretti sometimes held conversations. Grant already had eyes on the estate. He'd probably planted this or had someone else do it before ever calling her. The threat wasn't just about forcing her cooperation. It was insurance, a backup plan if she refused. Which meant Grant had already committed crimes by placing surveillance on private property without warrant. If she could prove it, if she could document the device and trace it back to him. But using it as leverage required evidence that wouldn't expose her own involvement, required careful planning, required help from someone who understood how Moretti's world worked. Required, she realized with sinking certainty, confessing everything to Dante Moretti himself. The thought terrified her. Men like Moretti didn't tolerate security breaches, didn't forgive potential betrayals, didn't generally respond well to revelations that their new employee had become a target for federal manipulation. But keeping secrets felt more dangerous than honesty. And if Grant had already planted surveillance, the threat to the estate wasn't hypothetical. It was active, present, ongoing. Lena made her decision. That evening, after Sophie was settled with dinner and a movie, Lena asked Vincent to arrange a private meeting with Moretti. The request must have carried unusual weight because within 20 minutes she was being escorted to Moretti's study, a room she'd glimpsed but never entered. The study was all dark wood and leather, books lining floor-to-ceiling shelves, a massive desk that looked hand-carved. Moretti sat behind it, still in his work clothes, reviewing documents that he set aside when she entered. Lena. Vincent said it was urgent. His eyes scanned her face with the kind of attention that missed nothing. What's wrong? She'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in her head, trying to find the right words. In the end, she abandoned rehearsal for raw truth. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you react. Her voice was steadier than she felt. 3 days ago, my ex-boyfriend called me. His name is Grant Voss. He's a federal investigator, and he knows I'm living here. He threatened to freeze Sophie's treatment funding unless I agree to spy on you, report your schedule, your meetings, people who visit the estate. He wants me to feed him information about your operations. Moretti's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went very cold and very dangerous. Lena pushed forward before fear could stop her. I didn't agree. I didn't give him anything. But today I found this. She pulled out her phone, showing him the photo she'd taken of the surveillance device in the south garden, hidden in the rose bushes. Grant already has surveillance on your property. He probably planted it before he ever called me, which means he's committed illegal surveillance. The threat about Sophie was just backup leverage. You found an FBI surveillance device on my property, Moretti said quietly, his tone absolutely neutral in a way that was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. And you're telling me this why? Because your conscience bothered you, or because you realized you'd been caught? The question was fair and brutal. Because I won't betray you, Lena said simply. Because you saved my sister's life, and I don't repay kindness with treachery. And because if Grant Voss thinks he can use Sophie to force me into becoming his informant, he's miscalculated badly enough that I want him to pay for it. Silence stretched between them, heavy and assessing. Then Moretti leaned back in his chair, his face still unreadable. Tell me everything about Grant Voss. Everything. So she did. The whole ugly history, how they dated for 8 months 3 years ago, how she'd discovered him using her neighbor's Wi-Fi to run unauthorized background checks, how the breakup had been acrimonious and Grant had made veiled threats about making her regret ending things. She told him about the phone call, repeated Grant's threats verbatim, explained her calculations about why honesty seemed less dangerous than secrets. Moretti listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled in front of his face, his eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You could have said nothing, he finally said. You could have fed Voss irrelevant information, played both sides, kept yourself safe. No, Lena disagreed. I couldn't, because Sophie's safety depends on you trusting me. If I'd started lying, started feeding information to the FBI, eventually you'd find out. You didn't build your organization by being careless, and then where would we be? Sophie would lose her treatment, I'd lose your trust, and Grant would still have leverage. Honesty was the only move that didn't guarantee disaster. Something that might have been respect flickered across Moretti's face. You're smarter than you pretend to be. I'm a waitress who learned to read people by watching which tables tipped and which ones stiffed you, Lena said. Same skills, different application. Moretti stood, moving to the window that overlooked the gardens where the surveillance device was still hidden. Grant Voss, federal investigator, corrupt enough to plan illegal surveillance and threaten a cancer patient to force cooperation. He turned back to face her. What do you want to happen here, Lena? The question surprised her. What do I want? You came to me with the problem. I'm asking what solution you're hoping for. Lena thought about it carefully. I want Sophie's treatment to continue without interference. I want Grant to lose his leverage over me. And ideally, I want him to face consequences for threatening a sick kid to force illegal cooperation. That's reasonable, Moretti said. What are you willing to do to make that happen? Whatever you need, Lena said, and meant it. Within limits that don't put Sophie in danger. Moretti smiled then, a real smile, sharp and dangerous and oddly beautiful. Then here's what we're going to do. Grant Voss thinks he's got you trapped. We're going to let him keep thinking that while we build a trap of our own. You're going to feed him exactly what I tell you to feed him. Information that sounds valuable but is actually useless or false. Meanwhile, my people will document every illegal move he makes, every regulation he violates, every line he crosses. And then we'll have enough evidence to bury him with his own corruption. Federal investigators who plant illegal surveillance and threaten civilians don't fare well when their supervisors find out. We'll feed Grant enough rope to hang himself, and you'll be the one holding the evidence when it happens. Lena felt something unlock in her chest. Not relief exactly, but the sense that maybe, possibly, there was a path through this nightmare that didn't end with Sophie dying. "You're going to help me," she said, and it wasn't quite a question. "You were honest with me when lying would have been easier and possibly safer," Moretti replied. "That kind of integrity is rare, worth protecting." He moved back to his desk, already pulling out his phone to make calls. "Also, I really don't like federal agents who think they can threaten my people." His people. Lena noticed the possessive, the way Moretti had just claimed her into his organization's protection without asking permission. She should have been nervous about that. Instead, she felt safer than she had in 72 hours. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank me when it's over. For now, get some rest. Tomorrow we start teaching Grant Voss that threatening Sophie Hart was the biggest mistake of his career." Lena left the study feeling lighter, despite the weight of what was coming. She'd chosen her side. Now she just had to trust that the dangerous man she'd placed her faith in could actually deliver on his promises. Behind her, through the study door, she heard Moretti's voice on the phone. "I need full backgrounds on a federal investigator named Grant Voss. Everything. Financials, case history, personal life, dirt we can use. And find out who else he's working with. Nobody plants surveillance on my property alone." The hunt had begun. The war room materialized overnight in Moretti's study, transformed from elegant executive space into something that looked like it belonged in a tactical operations center. By the time Lena arrived the next morning at 7, unable to sleep, her mind churning through scenarios, 3 additional men had joined Vincent, all of them moving with the quiet efficiency of people who'd done this before. Marcus was the oldest, silver-haired, and wearing reading glasses that made him look like someone's grandfather, until you noticed the way his eyes cataloged everything with predatory precision. He introduced himself simply, no last name offered, and Lena understood instinctively that asking for one would be a mistake. "Ms. Hart," Marcus said, shaking her hand with a grip that was firm without being aggressive. "I handle security and intelligence for Mr. Moretti's organization. I understand we have a federal pest problem that needs exterminating." Lena glanced at Moretti, who was leaning against his desk with a cup of coffee, and the kind of controlled energy that suggested he'd been awake for hours making phone calls and moving pieces on boards Lena couldn't see. "Exterminating might be strong," Moretti said mildly. "We're simply going to ensure Agent Voss receives appropriate consequences for his poor judgment." "Right," Marcus said with the tone of someone who knew exactly what appropriate consequences meant in their world. "Let's start with what we know." He spread photographs across the desk, surveillance images of Grant Voss entering and leaving a federal building, sitting in coffee shops, meeting with people Lena didn't recognize. The images were high resolution, taken from multiple angles, professional enough to make Lena realize Moretti's organization had capabilities that went far beyond what she'd imagined. "Grant Voss, 34, federal investigator with the Organized Crime Task Force for 6 years, Marcus narrated, pulling up additional files on a laptop. "Divorced, no kids, lives alone in a condo in Brooklyn. Decent service record on paper, but our sources inside the bureau say he's got a reputation for cutting corners and pushing boundaries that make his supervisors nervous." "Meaning he's corrupt," Lena said flatly. "Meaning he operates in gray areas and has a history of unauthorized surveillance that's gotten him reprimands but never formal discipline." Marcus tapped one of the photos. "The device you found in the garden? We pulled it last night, traced the serial number. It's FBI equipment, but it was checked out under a case number that doesn't exist. Voss falsified requisition paperwork to get his hands on it." "That's illegal," Lena said. "Very," Moretti agreed, "which gives us leverage. But we need more than one illegal surveillance device to truly bury him. We need a pattern of corruption that his supervisors can't ignore. So we give him rope and watch him hang himself, Vincent said from his position near the window, where he'd been watching the grounds with the vigilance of someone who took security personally. Moretti nodded. Exactly. Lena, when Voss calls you again, you're going to agree to cooperate. Tell him you'll feed him information, but you need time to establish patterns and access. Make it believable. Lena's stomach tightened. And then what? I just make things up? You tell him exactly what I tell you to tell him, Moretti said, his voice gentle but absolutely firm. Information that sounds valuable but is either false or relates to legitimate business activities that won't hurt my operations. Meanwhile, we'll be recording every conversation, documenting every request, building a case that proves he's running an illegal operation using federal resources. Won't he be recording the calls too? Lena asked. Probably, Marcus said. But his recordings will show him soliciting information from a civilian under duress, which is illegal even for federal agents. Our recordings will show the same thing, plus we'll have documentation of the threats he made regarding your sister's medical treatment. Federal investigators aren't allowed to threaten sick children to force cooperation, Lena. That's not how legitimate investigations work. The weight of what they were proposing settled over her. You want me to be bait. I want you to be exactly what you are, Moretti corrected. Someone who's been placed in an impossible position by a corrupt agent who's abusing his power. The difference is that instead of facing him alone, you'll have my full resources backing you up. Every conversation monitored, every threat documented, every move he makes tracked and recorded. Lena looked at the photographs spread across the desk, at Grant's face frozen in various moments of his daily life, completely unaware that he'd just become the target of an organization with resources that dwarfed anything a single federal agent could muster. What if he realizes what we're doing? She asked. What if he figures out I went to you? Then he'll make mistakes trying to cover his tracks, Marcus said, with the calm certainty of someone who'd seen this play out before. Panicked people make errors. Errors create evidence. Evidence destroys careers. And if he doesn't panic? If he just disappears or stops contacting me? Then we use what we already have to file a formal complaint with his supervisors, Moretti said. The illegal surveillance device alone is enough to trigger an internal investigation, but I'd prefer to build an airtight case that leaves no room for him to spin a story or claim entrapment. I want him gone, Lena. Permanently removed from any position where he can threaten you or Sophie ever again. The protective edge in Moretti's voice surprised her. This wasn't just tactical maneuvering. This was personal in a way she hadn't expected. Okay, Lena said, making her decision. Tell me exactly what to do. They spent the next 2 hours rehearsing. Marcus played Grant's role, throwing aggressive questions and demands, while Lena practiced responses that sounded cooperative without actually promising anything specific. Moretti coached her on tone, on how to sound reluctant but ultimately willing, on the small verbal cues that would make Grant believe he'd successfully intimidated her into compliance. Remember, Moretti said as they wrapped up the third rehearsal, he already thinks he's won. Men like Voss, men who use power to bully people into submission, they expect capitulation. Your job is to give him what he expects while we build the trap around him. Vincent's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked at Moretti with an expression that made Lena's pulse quicken. We've got movement. Voss just entered a coffee shop 3 blocks from the estate. He's got surveillance equipment with him. He's positioning for another plant, Marcus said grimly. Probably trying to get audio inside the main house. Moretti's face went cold. How close can he get? Not close enough to penetrate the property without triggering our security systems, Vincent assured him, but he might try to bribe a vendor or utility worker for access. Then we let him try, Moretti decided, and we document every illegal step. Marcus, I want eyes on Voss 24/7, every person he talks to, every location he scouts, every piece of equipment he deploys. Build me a timeline of criminal activity that will make his supervisor's head spin. Already on it, Marcus said, his fingers flying across his laptop keyboard. Lena watched this unfold with a strange sense of displacement. Yesterday, she'd been a dog trainer trying to rehabilitate a traumatized Pitbull. Today, she was at the center of what was essentially a counterintelligence operation being run by a criminal organization against a federal agent. The absurdity should have been laughable. Instead, it felt inevitable, like she'd been moving toward this moment since the night Brutus had launched himself across Corso's dining room, and she'd stepped forward instead of running away. "Lena," Moretti's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "You're quiet. What are you thinking?" "That my life got very complicated very fast," she said honestly, "and that I'm trusting you with things that could destroy me and Sophie if this goes wrong." Mr. Moretti runs legitimate businesses, restaurants, real estate, import companies. He also runs less legitimate operations that I won't detail because you're better off not knowing specifics. What I can tell you is that he values loyalty, protects his people, and doesn't tolerate threats to his organization or anyone under his protection. You and Sophie are under his protection now. That means something in our world. Our world, Lena repeated. I'm part of this now, aren't I? Whether I wanted to be or not. You became part of this the moment you accepted his offer to work with Brutus, Vincent said, not unkindly. But being part of it doesn't mean you're trapped. Mr. Moretti doesn't force loyalty, he earns it. You'll see. Lena wasn't sure if that was reassuring or terrifying, but she pocketed the secure phone and headed to the guest house where Sophie was having breakfast with Patricia, the oncology nurse. Hey, Sophie said brightly, looking healthier than she had in months. The estate's food, clean air, and reduced stress were already showing effects. Patricia says my blood work from yesterday looks good. White cell count is up. That's wonderful, Lena said, hugging her sister and trying to project normalcy despite the tactical planning session she'd just left. How are you feeling? Like I might actually make it to 16, Sophie said with the dark humor that was her coping mechanism. Then her expression shifted, sharpened with the perceptiveness that illness had given her. What's wrong? And don't say nothing. You've got your something's wrong, but I'm protecting you face on. Lena glanced at Patricia, who took the hint and excused herself to check Sophie's medical supplies in the other room. Remember my ex, Grant? Lena said quietly, sitting beside her sister. He contacted me. He's trying to pressure me into spying on Moretti, threatening to mess with your treatment funding if I don't cooperate. Sophie's face went pale, then flushed with anger. That absolute piece of, what are you going to do? I told Moretti everything. We're handling it. We? Sophie's eyes widened. Lena, you went to a Mafia boss about your federal agent ex-boyfriend threatening me? Are you insane? Probably, Lena admitted. But Grant already had surveillance planted on the property. Moretti would have found it eventually and known I was a security risk. Being honest seemed safer than secrets. And Moretti didn't freak out? Didn't kick us out or worse? He's helping me build a case against Grant, documenting his illegal surveillance, recording the threats, gathering evidence to destroy his career. Lena took her sister's hands. I know this sounds crazy, but I trust Moretti more than I trust Grant right now. At least Moretti's been honest about what he is. Sophie processed this with the gravity of someone too young to be this familiar with moral complexity. Okay, so what happens now? Now I work with Brutus, act normal, and wait for Grant to call again. When he does, I'll feed him false information while Moretti's people document everything. You're using yourself as bait. I'm using myself as a weapon, Lena corrected. There's a difference. Sophie squeezed her hands. Just promise me you'll be careful. I didn't survive leukemia just to lose my sister to mob warfare. You haven't survived it yet, Lena said, trying to lighten the mood. Don't get cocky. Too late, I'm already planning my 16th birthday party. I'm thinking something understated, maybe just rent out a whole restaurant, get a live band, invite everyone I've ever met. Lena laughed despite everything, grateful for her sister's resilience. Let's get you to remission first, then we'll discuss your delusions of grandeur. She spent the rest of the morning working with Brutus in the training yard, running through desensitization exercises that were showing remarkable progress. The dog who'd exploded at breaking glass a week ago now barely flinched at dropped objects. His hypervigilance was decreasing, replaced by moments of genuine calm that suggested his nervous system was learning new default settings. Good boy, Lena murmured, rewarding him with treats and praise as he maintained a relaxed posture despite construction noise from a neighboring property. You're doing so well. Brutus's tail wagged, and he leaned against her leg with the kind of trust that still felt miraculous given his history. Moretti appeared around noon, watching from the edge of the training yard with an expression that might have been pride or might have been something more complicated. "He's different," Moretti said as Lena called a break, and Brutus trotted over to drink from his water bowl. Calmer, more confident. "He's learning that the world isn't always threatening," Lena said, wiping sweat from her forehead. The October sun was unseasonably warm. "It'll take time to fully rewire his trauma responses, but we're making progress. You have a gift for this. I had a good teacher. My father understood that most aggression is just fear wearing a different mask." She paused, then added carefully, "Kind of like people, I guess." Moretti's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. "Is that your professional assessment, that I'm just fear wearing a different mask?" "I don't know you well enough to make assessments," Lena said honestly. "But I've noticed that people who've built the kind of reputation you have usually did it because showing vulnerability was too dangerous." "And what do you think I'm afraid of?" The question hung between them, more personal than their usual exchanges. Lena considered deflecting, keeping things professional and safe. But something about the way Moretti was looking at her, like he actually wanted an honest answer rather than comfortable platitudes, made her take the risk. "I think you're afraid of being alone," she said quietly. "Not physically alone, but truly alone. Surrounded by people who want things from you but don't actually see you. It's why Brutus matters so much. He's the only one in your life who doesn't have an agenda." Moretti went very still, his face carefully neutral in a way that told her she'd struck close to something true. "That's perceptive," he said finally, "and possibly accurate, though I'd appreciate if you kept your psychological assessments to the dog." "Fair enough." Lena called Brutus back over, ending the moment before it could become something neither of them was ready to handle. "I should get back to work. We're tackling sound desensitization this afternoon." "Lena," Moretti's voice stopped her. "Voss will call soon. Are you ready?" "As ready as I can be for lying to a federal agent while you record everything for a counter-investigation." She tried to smile. "Just another normal Tuesday. If he threatens Sophie again, if he pushes too hard, you end the call. Don't let him see that he's gotten to you." "I won't." But when Grant's call came 3 hours later, Lena was reading in the guest house while Sophie napped. The sound of his voice still made her stomach clench with remembered anger and current fear. "Lena," Grant said smoothly, like they were old friends catching up. "I hope you've had time to think about our conversation." Lena activated the recording app Marcus had installed on her phone, watching the red light blink confirmation. "I've thought about it." "And?" "And you didn't leave me much choice." She let frustration bleed into her voice, made herself sound defeated rather than defiant. "Sophie needs her treatment. If helping you is what it takes to keep her alive, then I'll help you." "Smart girl, I knew you'd see reason." The satisfaction in his voice made Lena want to throw her phone against the wall. "So here's how this works. Once a week, you'll call this number and report on Moretti's activities, who visits the estate, what meetings he takes, any business discussions you overhear, nothing huge, just details that paint a picture. What if I don't overhear anything? I work with his dog Grant. I'm not exactly sitting in on business meetings. Then you make opportunities, get friendly with his staff, pay attention to patterns, use that clever brain I know you have." Lena took a breath, remembering Moretti's coaching about sounding reluctant but cooperative. "This feels wrong. He's been good to me and Sophie. He's paying for her treatment. He gave us a place to live. He's a criminal, Lena. He's good to you because you're useful. The moment you stop being useful, you become a liability. Don't confuse business transactions with actual kindness." "Fine," she injected defeat into the word. "What do you want to know?" "Let's start simple. How many people live on the estate? Security details, household staff, anyone who seems to be part of his inner circle." This was the part they'd rehearsed. Lena provided information that was technically accurate but ultimately meaningless. Staff numbers that included legitimate household employees, security details that were visible to anyone who drove past the property, nothing that revealed actual organizational structure or sensitive operations. Grant lapped it up, clearly believing he'd successfully turned her. "Good," he said when she finished. "See? That wasn't so hard. Next week, I want to know about his schedule, where he goes, who he meets with, any patterns you notice. Grant, I need to know that Sophie's treatment won't be touched, that you'll leave her funding alone. As long as you cooperate, your sister is fine. But Lena? His voice went cold. If I find out you're lying to me, if I discover you've told Moretti about our arrangement, Sophie's treatment gets frozen immediately, and I'll make sure the investigation ties up those funds for months. Do we understand each other? Yes. The word tasted like poison. Excellent. Talk to you next week. The line went dead, and Lena sat staring at her phone with her hands shaking from suppressed rage. The recording app showed 12 minutes of documented coercion, threats, and illegal solicitation of information. The secure phone Vincent had given her buzzed immediately. His text read, "Got it all? Recording is clean and admissible. You did great." Moretti's text arrived seconds later. "Come to the study when you're ready." Lena checked on Sophie, still sleeping peacefully, and made her way to the main house. The study had transformed again, now featuring audio equipment and Marcus replaying her conversation with Grant through speakers that made every nuance clear. "He's confident," Marcus observed as the recording ended. "Thinks he's got you completely under control. That's good for us. Overconfident people make mistakes." "He threatened Sophie again," Lena said, her voice tight. "Said he'd freeze her treatment if he finds out I told you." "Empty threat," Moretti said firmly. "Sophie's treatment is paid through a trust that has no connection to my name or my businesses. He can't touch it without committing fraud, and even Voss isn't stupid enough to mess with medical trusts. He's just using fear as leverage." "Well, it's working." Lena sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "I hated every second of that call." "Which made you sound completely authentic," Marcus assured her. "He believed you, which means our trap is working. Now we wait for him to make his next move." The next move came faster than expected. That night, around 11 p.m., Vincent's security team caught someone attempting to bribe the estate's landscaping crew foreman with $5,000 in exchange for planting listening devices in the main house's common areas. The someone was a private investigator working for Grant Voss. Vincent had the man detained in the estate's security office, a room Lena hadn't known existed until she was summoned there at midnight to identify whether she recognized him. She didn't, but the man's phone contained text messages from Grant detailing exactly what surveillance equipment to plant and where. "This is felony conspiracy," Marcus said with obvious satisfaction, photographing every message. "Bribing employees of a private residence to plant illegal surveillance on behalf of a federal agent. Voss just graduated from career-ending stupidity to potential prison time." "What do we do with him?" Lena asked, nodding toward the private investigator who sat handcuffed and looking terrified in the corner. "We let him go," Moretti said calmly, "with a very clear message that if he ever sets foot on my property again, or if he tells Voss that we caught him, he'll regret both decisions. Then we document everything and add it to our case file." The private investigator was released 20 minutes later, presumably to report his failure to Grant without mentioning his capture. Lena watched him leave through the security monitors, his car speeding through the gates like pursued prey. "Voss is going to escalate," Vincent predicted. "He's tried direct threats, tried surveillance, tried using proxies. When those fail, he'll get desperate." "Good," Moretti said, and there was something predatory in his smile. "Desperate men make the kind of mistakes that end careers." Over the next week, the pattern continued. Grant called Lena twice more, each conversation recorded and documented. He pushed for more detailed information, grew frustrated when she claimed limited access, alternated between threats about Sophie and promises that cooperation would be rewarded. Each call made Lena's skin crawl, but she stuck to the script Moretti and Marcus had prepared, providing information that sounded valuable but was actually sanitized intelligence that revealed nothing useful about Moretti's actual operations. Meanwhile, Marcus's investigation into Grant revealed a pattern of misconduct that went back years: unauthorized surveillance on other cases, evidence that had mysteriously disappeared from federal custody, witnesses who'd been intimidated into changing testimony. Grant Voss wasn't just cutting corners. He was fundamentally corrupt, using his federal badge to run what essentially amounted to a personal vendetta service. "He's done this before," Marcus explained during one of their evening strategy sessions. "Gone after people he perceived as threats or enemies, used his position to destroy them, You're just his latest target, Lena. If we don't stop him now, he'll do this to someone else. The realization that she was just one entry in a long list of Grant's victims should have been depressing. Instead, it fueled Lena's determination. She wasn't just protecting herself and Sophie anymore. She was potentially stopping Grant from hurting other people who might not have Dante Moretti's resources backing them up. 10 days after the initial phone call, everything came to a head. Grant contacted Lena with new urgency, demanding a face-to-face meeting to discuss sensitive information he couldn't trust to phone calls. The meeting was set for midnight at a public park in Queens, isolated enough for privacy, public enough that Lena theoretically shouldn't feel threatened. Absolutely not, Moretti said flatly when Lena reported the request. It's too risky. He could be planning anything from additional intimidation to physical harm. But it's also an opportunity, Marcus countered. If he's demanding face-to-face contact, he's probably planning to escalate. Maybe physical threats, maybe showing her fabricated evidence, maybe bringing additional leverage. Whatever it is, if we can record it, we'll have even stronger evidence. By putting Lena in danger, Moretti said, his voice tight with controlled anger. No. Find another way. There is no other way, Lena heard herself say. Grant's getting suspicious. I can hear it in his voice. He thinks I'm holding back, which I am. If I refuse this meeting, he'll know something's wrong. He'll either disappear or he'll follow through on his threats about Sophie. Your sister is protected. But he doesn't know that. And even if he can't actually touch her treatment, he can make our lives hell in other ways. File false reports, trigger investigations, use his federal credentials to create problems we can't easily solve. Lena looked at Moretti directly. You said desperate men make mistakes. Let's make him desperate enough to make a mistake we can use to finish this. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Finally, Moretti turned to Vincent. Full tactical support. I want eyes on that park from every angle, close-range audio surveillance, and a response team positioned within 30 seconds of Lena's location. She wears a wire, carries a panic button, and at the first sign of physical threat, we extract her immediately. I'll coordinate with Marcus, Vincent said, already moving toward communications equipment. Moretti looked at Lena, his expression harder to read than usual. You're sure about this? No, she admitted, but I'm sure that staying passive isn't working, and I'm sure that I want Grant Voss out of my life permanently. If this meeting gives us the evidence we need to make that happen, it's worth the risk. You're braver than you think, Moretti said quietly, or more desperate. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. The meeting was set for midnight on a Tuesday. Lena spent the hours before in careful preparation. Marcus fitted her with surveillance equipment so sophisticated it was invisible. Vincent briefed her on hand signals and emergency protocols, and Moretti insisted she carry a small canister of pepper spray that she sincerely hoped she wouldn't need. Sophie knew something was happening. Her sister had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense danger. But Lena deflected with partial truths about meeting with someone from her old job to handle paperwork. The lie sat heavy, but the alternative was terrifying, a sick 15-year-old with information she couldn't change and didn't need. At 11:30, Vincent drove Lena to Queens in an unmarked sedan, his presence somehow both comforting and a reminder of how seriously everyone was taking potential danger. Marcus and 2 other security specialists were already positioned around the park, invisible to casual observation but ready to respond instantly. You remember the signals? Vincent asked as they pulled up 2 blocks from the meeting location. Right hand touching my ear means I need immediate extraction. Left hand on my hip means I'm okay, but want backup closer. Lena took a shaky breath. Vincent, what if this goes wrong? Then we handle it, he said simply. But it won't go wrong, Ms. Hart. We're very good at what we do. And we don't leave our people behind. Our people. There it was again, that sense of belonging to something larger and more dangerous than she'd ever intended. Lena walked to the park alone, her footsteps echoing in the October night. The location Grant had chosen was a small neighborhood park with scattered benches and a playground that looked eerie in the streetlight shadows. Empty at this hour, the isolation was complete. Grant was already there, sitting on a bench near the playground, wearing a jacket despite the mild night. He stood when he saw her, and Lena was struck by how ordinary he looked, Just a man in his 30s with forgettable features and the kind of face that wouldn't stand out in a crowd. That had always been Grant's gift, she remembered, looking harmless while being anything but. "Lena," he said, like they were friends meeting for coffee. "Thanks for coming." "You didn't give me much choice." She stayed standing, maintaining distance. "What's so important it couldn't wait for our regular call?" "I wanted to look you in the eye when we had this conversation." Grant moved closer, and Lena fought the urge to step back. "See, I've been thinking about our arrangement, about how willing you were to cooperate after some initial resistance. It felt too easy." Lena's pulse kicked up, but she kept her face neutral. "You threatened my sister. What did you expect?" "I expected more fight from the woman who once dumped me over some harmless background checks." His smile was cold. "Which makes me wonder if maybe you're playing me, Lena. If maybe you went to Moretti and this whole thing is a setup." This was the moment. The trap springing or the trap failing, everything balanced on how well she could sell the lie. "You think I'd risk Sophie's life to protect Dante Moretti?" Lena let anger sharpen her voice. Not fake anger, but real fury at being in this position. "You think I care more about some criminal's privacy than my sister surviving cancer? I think you care about doing the right thing, which sometimes makes people do stupid things." Grant pulled out his phone, swiping through something Lena couldn't see. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to prove your loyalty by giving me something real. Not the sanitized bullshit about staff numbers and visible security. Real intelligence, names of Moretti's business partners, details about his operations, concrete evidence I can use." "I don't have that kind of access." "Then get it." Grant's voice went hard. "Or I don't just freeze Sophie's treatment, Lena. I manufacture evidence that you're complicit in Moretti's operations. Accessory to racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, whatever sticks. You'll go to prison, Sophie loses her guardian, and she ends up in state custody with no one to fight for her medical care." The threat was so outrageous, so far beyond reasonable, that for a moment Lena just stared at him in disbelief. "You can't do that," she said. "That's literally fabricating evidence against an innocent person. Who's going to stop me?" Grant stepped even closer, and Lena could smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn when they dated, now forever associated with this nightmare. "I'm a federal agent with 6 years of service. You're nobody. Who do you think people will believe?" This was it. The escalation they'd been waiting for, threats so extreme and illegal that no internal affairs investigation could ignore them. Lena touched her right ear, the extraction signal, then forced herself to play the part for just a few more seconds. "You want real information?" she said, letting her voice shake with what Grant would interpret as fear. "Fine. I'll get you real information, but you leave Sophie alone. Completely alone. That's the deal." "That's the deal," Grant agreed, and the satisfaction in his voice made Lena's skin crawl. Movement erupted from multiple directions simultaneously. Vincent appeared from behind the playground equipment, Marcus materialized from the tree line, and 2 more security specialists cut off the park's exits with the precision of military operators. Grant's hand went to his jacket, reaching for a weapon Lena suddenly realized he was carrying, but Vincent was faster, his massive frame covering the distance impossibly quick and pinning Grant's arm before he could draw. "Federal agent!" Grant shouted, trying to assert authority even as he was being restrained. "You're assaulting a federal officer. You're a corrupt agent threatening an innocent civilian with fabricated charges and manufactured evidence," Marcus said calmly, approaching with his phone displaying a very clear recording of the entire conversation, "which we have documented on video and audio from 4 different angles, all admissible in court." The color drained from Grant's face as the reality of his situation hit him. Moretti appeared from the shadows near the park entrance, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who'd orchestrated this entire scenario and knew exactly how it would end. "Agent Voss," he said pleasantly, like greeting an acquaintance, "I believe you and I need to have a conversation about boundaries and consequences." "This is entrapment," Grant spat, still struggling against Vincent's iron grip. "Everything you recorded is inadmissible. Entrapment requires law enforcement to induce someone to commit a crime they wouldn't otherwise commit," Marcus interrupted. "You initiated contact with Ms. Hart, you made the threats, you escalated to demanding fabricated evidence. We simply documented your freely chosen criminal actions. Moretti crouched down to Grant's level, his voice dropping to something quiet and absolutely terrifying. Here's what happens next. We're releasing you because, unlike you, we don't illegally detain people. You're going to go home and think very carefully about your choices. Tomorrow morning, my attorney will be delivering a comprehensive file to your supervisors at the FBI, documentation of every illegal surveillance device you planted, every threat you made, every law you violated while pursuing your personal vendetta against Ms. Hart. Your career is over, Agent Voss. The only question is whether you also face criminal charges. You can't. I already have. The question is what you're going to do about it. Moretti stood, nodding to Vincent. Let him go. Grant stumbled when Vincent released him, his earlier confidence completely shattered. He looked at Lena with something between hatred and disbelief. You chose him, Grant said, a criminal over a federal agent. I chose the person who actually protected me instead of using me, Lena corrected. There's a difference. Grant opened his mouth like he wanted to say something else, but Marcus stepped forward with the kind of presence that suggested further conversation would be unwise. Grant apparently agreed, turning and walking quickly toward the park exit. The moment he was gone, Lena's knees buckled. Vincent caught her, his steady grip keeping her upright while delayed shock rolled through her system. You did it, Vincent said quietly. You got everything we needed. He was going to fabricate evidence against me, Lena said, her voice shaking. Put me in prison just to cover his ego. Sophie would have— But he won't, Moretti interrupted, appearing at her other side. Because tomorrow his supervisors receive documentation of corruption so comprehensive, he'll be lucky if administrative leave is his worst problem. By the end of the week, Grant Voss won't be in a position to threaten anyone ever again. Lena looked up at him, this dangerous man who'd just orchestrated the destruction of a federal agent's career to protect her, and felt something shift in her understanding of safety and power and protection. Thank you, she said simply. Thank me when it's finished, Moretti replied, echoing his earlier promise. Then, surprising her, he added gently, but you're welcome. No one threatens my people and walks away unscathed. My people. Lena was definitely one of them now, for better or worse. The ride back to the estate was quiet, Lena processing everything while Vincent drove and Marcus coordinated evidence delivery with legal teams that apparently operated at midnight without question. The city lights blurred past the windows, Manhattan's skyline sharp against the night sky, and Lena felt like she was seeing it all from a completely different angle than she had just 2 weeks ago. Back at the guest house, she found Sophie still awake despite the late hour, curled on the couch with a book and obvious worry. You're okay, Sophie said immediately, relief flooding her face. I knew something was happening. Don't try to lie. Grant's gone, Lena said, sinking onto the couch beside her sister. Or he will be soon. Moretti helped me build a case against him for corruption and illegal threats. By tomorrow, Grant won't be able to hurt us anymore. Sophie processed this with the gravity that had become her default mode. You used yourself as bait to take down your corrupt federal agent ex-boyfriend with help from a Mafia boss. Lena, your life is insane. I know. Lena pulled her sister close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo and feeling the too fragile frame that was slowly, hopefully, getting stronger. But you're safe, that's what matters. We're safe, Sophie corrected. Both of us. For the first time in longer than Lena could remember, that actually felt true. The fallout from Grant Voss's spectacular professional implosion arrived faster than even Marcus had predicted. Lena woke the next morning to her phone buzzing with a news alert that made her read the headline 3 times before believing it was real. FBI agent suspended pending investigation into misconduct allegations, the New York Times reported, complete with Grant's official bureau photograph staring back at her from the screen. The article was sparse on details, citing ongoing internal review and multiple complaints regarding unauthorized surveillance. But the message was clear. Grant Voss's career was circling the drain in very public fashion. Sophie appeared in Lena's bedroom doorway with her own phone, her eyes wide. It's everywhere. CNN, local news, even Twitter. They're calling him the rogue agent and speculating about corruption scandals. Moretti works fast, Lena murmured, scrolling through article after article. Each one painted Grant in increasingly unflattering terms, suggesting a pattern of misconduct that the Bureau had allegedly overlooked for years. Someone had clearly leaked extensively to the press, ensuring maximum damage to Grant's reputation while the official investigation was still underway. Her secure phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Phase 1 complete. Federal prosecutors reviewing criminal charges for illegal surveillance and witness intimidation. Recommend you avoid all media contact. Lena showed the message to Sophie, who let out a long breath. So it's really over? Grant can't come after us anymore? Not without committing career suicide on top of actual suicide, Lena said. He's going to be too busy defending himself to threaten anyone else. But even as she said it, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings about cornered animals and desperate men. Grant had always been vindictive when challenged, and humiliation tended to make him mean rather than cautious. She pushed the worry down and focused on the day ahead. Brutus needed training, Sophie had a checkup with Patricia, and Lena had promised herself she wouldn't let Grant's shadow contaminate the life she was building here. The morning training session with Brutus revealed remarkable progress. The dog, who'd been a hair-trigger disaster 3 weeks ago, now responded to verbal cues with reliability, maintained calm even when landscaping crews created sudden noise, and most impressively had started showing genuine playfulness during exercise sessions. "Look at you," Lena said, throwing a tennis ball that Brutus retrieved with enthusiasm rather than anxiety. "You're remembering how to be a dog instead of a weapon." Brutus dropped the ball at her feet, his tail wagging so hard his entire back end wiggled. The transformation was stunning, and Lena felt pride swell in her chest at the evidence that patience and proper conditioning could undo even severe trauma. Moretti appeared at the edge of the training yard around 11, watching with the same expression he'd worn before, something between satisfaction and something softer that Lena couldn't quite name. "He's playing," Moretti observed, his voice carrying genuine wonder. "I've had him 2 years and I've never seen him play." "Play is a sign of security," Lena explained, calling Brutus back for a water break. "Dogs who feel constantly threatened don't waste energy on non-survival activities. The fact that he's playing means his nervous system is finally starting to relax." "You did that." It wasn't a question. "We did it together. You gave him stability, safety, consistent routines. I just helped him learn to trust those things." Lena paused, then added, "How are you feeling about yesterday? The situation with Grant?" Moretti's expression shifted, professional mask sliding into place. "Satisfied. The FBI doesn't tolerate agents who abuse their authority, especially when the evidence is as comprehensive as what we provided. Grant Voss will be fortunate if he avoids federal prison." "He's going to hate me for this," Lena said quietly. "When he realizes I helped you build the case against him, when it sinks in that I chose your protection over his coercion." "He already hates you," Moretti interrupted gently. "That's why he targeted you in the first place. Men like Voss don't need rational reasons to hate. They just need someone to blame for their own failures and inadequacies." The assessment was brutally accurate and somehow reassuring in its honesty. "Vincent mentioned you wanted to see me this afternoon," Lena said, changing the subject before her thoughts could spiral into anxiety about Grant's potential retaliation. "Something about security protocols?" "Yes. My head of security thinks we should implement additional measures given recent events. Nothing intrusive, just ensuring you and Sophie are properly protected if Voss decides to lash out before his arrest." Moretti's tone was casual, but Lena heard the underlying concern. "Can you come by my office around 2?" Lena agreed, watching Moretti leave with Brutus padding contentedly at his side. The dog's transformation mirrored something that was happening in Lena's own life. A gradual unwinding of constant vigilance, a cautious exploration of what safety might actually feel like. The afternoon meeting revealed that additional security measures meant armed escorts whenever Lena or Sophie left the estate, panic buttons installed in every room of the guest house, and a dedicated security specialist assigned specifically to monitor potential threats from Grant or anyone associated with him. "This seems excessive," Lena said, looking at the security plan Vincent had outlined. "Grant's suspended. He's being investigated. Why would he risk making things worse by coming after me?" "Because suspension isn't the same as defeated," Vincent replied, his linebacker frame somehow conveying both protection and warning. "Voss's entire identity is built on being a federal agent with power and authority. We just stripped that away publicly. Some men would retreat and regroup. Others get angry and lash out. You think Grant's the lashing out type, Lena said. I think we don't take chances with your safety or Sophie's. Moretti stood from behind his desk, moving to the window that overlooked the estate grounds. Vincent's right. Humiliated men do unpredictable things. Until Voss is either in custody or definitively no longer a threat, we maintain elevated security. The conversation continued for another hour, covering contingency plans and emergency protocols that made Lena's head spin with their complexity. By the time she left Moretti's office, the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the estate in gold and amber light that would have been beautiful if she wasn't busy calculating worst-case scenarios. Sophie was in the guest house kitchen when Lena returned, attempting to bake cookies with ingredients Rosa had apparently provided. The teenager was covered in flour, her bald head dusted white, and the kitchen looked like a baking explosion had occurred. Don't say anything, Sophie warned, wielding a wooden spoon defensively. I'm learning life skills. I wasn't going to say anything, Lena lied, biting back a smile. How are the life skills coming? The first batch burned. The second batch is raw in the middle. I'm hoping the third batch achieves the elusive state of actually edible. Sophie gestured at the oven where something was currently baking. Patricia says baking is therapeutic. She clearly hasn't seen my success rate. Lena moved to help, grateful for the normalcy of ruined cookies and flour-dusted kitchens. This was the life she wanted for Sophie. Teenager problems, messy experiments, the luxury of failure that didn't carry life-or-death stakes. They were pulling the third batch from the oven, marginally better than the previous attempts, when Lena's regular phone rang with an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Ms. Hart? The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. This is Detective Sarah Chen with the NYPD. I'm calling regarding an incident report filed by Grant Voss. Do you have a few minutes to speak? Lena's stomach dropped. What kind of incident report? Mr. Voss claims you've been harassing him, making threats, and that you've been cooperating with organized crime figures to intimidate him. He's requesting a restraining order and asking that we investigate your connection to Dante Moretti. Detective Chen's tone was carefully neutral. I'd like to hear your side of the story. This was exactly what Vincent had warned about. Grant was lashing out, trying to flip the narrative and paint himself as the victim. Detective Chen, I'd be happy to speak with you, but I'd like to have my attorney present for that conversation. Lena kept her voice steady, even as her hand shook. Is that acceptable? Of course, standard procedure. Chen rattled off a phone number. Have your attorney contact me to schedule a formal interview. In the meantime, I'd advise you to avoid any contact with Mr. Voss. That won't be a problem. I have no desire to speak with him. After the call ended, Lena immediately dialed the secure phone Vincent had given her. He answered on the first ring. What's wrong? NYPD detective just called. Grant filed a complaint claiming I'm harassing him and working with you to intimidate him. They want to interview me. Lena's voice was climbing despite her efforts to stay calm. Vincent, he's trying to make me look like the criminal here. Breathe, Vincent interrupted firmly. This is expected. Cornered suspects often try to muddy the waters by filing counter-complaints. It's a desperation move, not a strong position. I'm texting you our attorney's number right now. Her name is Rebecca Walsh. She's excellent, and she's already familiar with the Voss situation. Don't speak to any police without her present. The text arrived seconds later. Lena saved the number with trembling fingers while Sophie watched with wide, worried eyes. Is Grant causing problems again? Sophie asked once Lena hung up. He's trying to, Lena admitted, but Moretti's people are handling it. I just need to talk to an attorney and give a statement. Lena, Sophie's voice was small, younger than her 15 years. When does this end? When do we get to stop looking over our shoulders? Lena pulled her sister close, breathing in the scent of flour and vanilla and the medicated shampoo Sophie had to use during treatment. Soon, I promise. But the promise felt fragile, like something that could shatter at the first sign of pressure. The meeting with Rebecca Walsh happened the next morning in Moretti's study, a power move that made clear Lena wasn't some isolated civilian, but someone under the protection of an organization with substantial resources. Walsh was in her 40s, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, with the kind of sharp intelligence that suggested she won most battles before they reached courtrooms. Detective Chen's inquiry is standard procedure given Voss's complaint, Walsh explained, reviewing notes on her tablet. But his allegations are weak. He claims you're harassing him, but he can't provide evidence because you haven't contacted him at all. He claims you're working with organized crime to intimidate him, but the evidence we provided to the FBI shows he was the one doing the intimidating. So we just ignore it? Lena asked. We cooperate fully while controlling the narrative. I'll schedule your interview with Detective Chen, you'll answer questions truthfully, and I'll ensure the detective understands the context, that you're a victim of Voss's illegal surveillance and threats, not a co-conspirator in some imaginary intimidation campaign. Walsh smiled, and it was the smile of someone who enjoyed dismantling false narratives. Voss is grasping at straws. We're not going to let those straws save him. The interview happened 2 days later at a Manhattan precinct, with Walsh present and Detective Chen conducting the questioning with professional thoroughness. Lena answered every question honestly, providing documentation of Grant's threats, Marcus's recordings, and the timeline of events that made clear who had been victimizing whom. Detective Chen was good at her job, thorough, skeptical in appropriate ways, focused on facts rather than assumptions. By the end of the 2-hour interview, Lena could see the detective's perspective shifting as the evidence mounted. Ms. Hart, Chen said as they wrapped up, I'm going to be honest with you. When I received Mr. Voss's complaint, I was prepared to investigate possible criminal conspiracy. After reviewing your evidence and hearing your statement, I'm more concerned about Mr. Voss's conduct than yours. I'll be forwarding my findings to the FBI's Internal Affairs Division. Relief flooded through Lena so intensely she felt lightheaded. Thank you, Detective. Don't thank me yet. Your statement helps establish a pattern of misconduct, but it doesn't guarantee Voss faces charges. The system moves slowly, and federal investigations can take months. Chen stood, offering her hand. In the meantime, if Mr. Voss contacts you in any way, you call me immediately. His complaint about harassment works both ways. If he's bothering you, we can pursue charges against him. Walking out of the precinct with Walsh, Lena felt like she had just survived another round in a fight that kept finding new arenas. You did well, Walsh said, her heels clicking on the sidewalk as they headed toward the car where Vincent waited. Chen's smart enough to see through Voss's manipulation. This complaint is going nowhere. But Grant's still out there, Lena said. Suspended, investigated, but not arrested, not stopped. Not yet, Walsh agreed, but every move he makes now is being watched by multiple agencies. He's isolated, desperate, and running out of options. That makes him dangerous in the short term, but it also means his window for causing real damage is closing. The reassurance helped, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that Grant had one more move planned. Men like him didn't go down without trying to take others with them. She was right. 3 days after the police interview, Vincent's security team detected suspicious activity near the estate's perimeter. Someone had been conducting surveillance from a rental car parked on the public road adjacent to the property, taking photographs, timing security patrols, mapping entry points with the methodical attention of someone planning an infiltration. The someone was Grant Voss. He's not even being subtle anymore, Marcus said, showing Lena the surveillance photos Vincent's team had captured. Grant's face was clearly visible in multiple shots. His suspended federal credentials apparently not enough to make him reconsider his increasingly reckless behavior. He's escalating towards something. We just don't know what yet. Should we contact the police? Lena asked, fighting the urge to check on Sophie for the 3rd time that hour. Her sister was safely in the guest house with Patricia and 2 security specialists, but maternal anxiety didn't respond well to logic. Already done, Moretti said, entering the study with Brutus at his side. The dog immediately came to Lena, pressing against her leg in what had become his default comfort behavior. Detective Chen is aware, and the FBI has been notified that their suspended agent is conducting surveillance on a private residence. But Lena, we need to consider that Voss might be planning something more aggressive than just watching. The implication was clear and terrifying. You think he might try to actually come onto the property? Lena said. I think a man who's lost everything and blames you for it might decide that if he's going down, he's taking you with him. Moretti's voice was gentle, but absolutely serious. Which is why I'm implementing lockdown protocols. You and Sophie stay in the main house where security is tightest. Vincent coordinates response teams. We wait for Voss to make his move, and when he does, we end this permanently. By end this permanently, you mean? I mean, we capture him in the act of whatever he's planning, document everything, and hand him to the authorities with enough evidence to ensure actual prison time instead of just administrative consequences. Moretti paused, then added with deliberate emphasis, I don't kill federal agents, Lena, no matter how corrupt they are. The attention isn't worth it, but I absolutely will ensure they face justice. The distinction mattered, and Lena appreciated the clarity. Moving into the main house felt like regression, back to being protected and contained instead of building independent lives. But Sophie took it with characteristic pragmatism, treating the whole thing like an adventure as she explored rooms she'd only glimpsed during dinner visits. This is like living in a museum, Sophie said, examining the art in one of the guest suites Moretti had assigned them. A really expensive museum where everything is perfectly arranged and probably costs more than our entire old apartment building. Try not to break anything, Lena advised, though her attention was divided between Sophie's exploration and the security monitors Vincent had installed in their suite. Multiple camera angles showed the estate grounds, the perimeter, the access roads, a comprehensive surveillance system that should theoretically prevent any surprise attacks. Should theoretically. The attack came at 2:17 a.m. on a Thursday, breaking the tense waiting with explosive violence. Lena woke to alarms shrieking through the house, red emergency lights strobing in the hallways, and Vincent's voice over an intercom system she hadn't known existed. Perimeter breach, Southgate. Armed intruder on grounds. All civilians to safe rooms immediately. Sophie was already awake, her face pale but focused in the way that illness and treatment had taught her. Panic helped nothing. Action helped everything. Safe room? Sophie asked, grabbing her medical go-bag with practiced efficiency. Lena's brain struggled to process through sleep fog and adrenaline. I don't know where... The suite door opened and Vincent appeared, moving with controlled urgency. This way. Now. He's armed with a handgun and appears to be heading toward the guest house. Lena's blood ran cold. He thinks we're still there. Which buys us time, Moretti said calmly. Security is already in position. When he enters the guest house, we'll have him surrounded. Clean capture, no casualties, maximum evidence for prosecution. On the monitors, Lena could see Grant moving through the gardens with the jerky, aggressive movements of someone running on rage and desperation. His face was visible in the security lighting, twisted with fury, eyes wild, completely unhinged from the careful federal agent facade he'd maintained for years. He's going to shoot up an empty house, Sophie whispered, watching the screens with horrified fascination. And we're going to record every second of it, Marcus said, adjusting camera angles to ensure optimal documentation. Armed assault on a private residence, illegal entry, weapons discharge if he fires. That's years of federal prison time, even before we add in his previous misconduct charges. Grant reached the guest house, paused at the door, then kicked it open with force that suggested rage rather than tactical thinking. He disappeared inside, and Lena watched the interior cameras show him moving through rooms that had been her home for weeks, destroying furniture, shouting her name, firing 2 shots into her empty bedroom that made Sophie flinch even through the safe room's reinforced walls. Now, Moretti said quietly. On the screens, security personnel emerged from strategic positions around the guest house, moving with coordinated precision. Lights flooded the interior, voices shouted commands, and within 30 seconds Grant was on the ground with 3 armed men securing him while he screamed about injustice and betrayal and conspiracy. It was over. The aftermath involved police, federal agents, evidence collection teams, and enough official presence to make the estate grounds look like a crime scene from a television drama. Detective Chen arrived personally, her expression grim as she supervised Grant's arrest on charges that included armed assault, breaking and entering, illegal weapons discharge, and a list of other offenses that Marcus recited with obvious satisfaction. He's done, Chen said to Lena as paramedics checked Grant for injuries while he shouted increasingly incoherent accusations. Not suspended, not under investigation, done. This kind of violent escalation guarantees prison time even if we dropped all the previous misconduct charges, which we won't. Lena watched them load Grant into a police car, his face pressed against the window. his eyes finding hers with hatred so pure it was almost tangible. She should have felt triumph, victory, relief that the threat was finally, definitively ended. Instead, she just felt tired. Exhausted by the constant vigilance, the endless chess match of protection and counter-threat. The reality that her choice to work with Brutus had dragged her into a world where federal agents conducted midnight raids and criminal organizations provided better safety than legitimate authorities. "It's over," Sophie said quietly, standing beside Lena on the main house steps as dawn broke over the estate. "Really over this time, right?" "Really over," Lena confirmed, pulling her sister close. "Grant's going to prison. He can't hurt us anymore." "Then why do you look sad?" Lena considered the question, watching Moretti speak with Detective Chen near the ruined guest house. "Because I'm realizing how much my life has changed. 3 weeks ago, I was a waitress trying to keep you alive. Now I'm standing in a crime lord's mansion watching my ex-boyfriend get arrested for trying to kill me. That's a lot of change for 3 weeks." "Do you regret it?" Sophie asked, accepting Moretti's offer, coming here. "No." The answer came immediately. "Certain, despite everything. Because you're alive, you're getting better, and we're safe. Everything else is just details." Sophie leaned her head on Lena's shoulder. "Pretty dramatic details." "Yeah, well, turns out I have a gift for attracting drama." Moretti approached as the police vehicles finally departed, leaving the estate quieter but marked by the night's violence. Brutus walked beside him, the dog's presence somehow stabilizing despite, or perhaps because of, everything he represented. "The guest house will need repairs," Moretti said, gesturing at the damage visible through the broken door. "You and Sophie should stay in the main house until it's habitable again. Or longer, if you prefer. The suite is yours for as long as you want it." "Thank you," Lena said, "for everything. The protection, the resources, the help with Grant. All of it." "You're welcome. Though I should point out that you did most of the work yourself. You identified the threat, provided evidence, testified when needed. I just provided the infrastructure to make sure your courage had backup." Moretti paused, then added with something that might have been vulnerability. "You're good at this, Lena, at navigating complicated situations and making strategic decisions under pressure. Ever consider that you might be wasted as a dog trainer?" The suggestion caught her off guard. "What else would I be?" "Whatever you want. You've got instincts, intelligence, and apparently a high tolerance for danger. Those skills translate to a lot of different applications." He smiled slightly. "Think about it. For now, get some rest. You and Sophie have earned it." As Moretti walked away with Brutus, Sophie elbowed Lena gently. "Was he just offering you a job, like a real job in his organization?" "I think he might have been." "Are you going to take it?" Lena looked at the estate grounds, at the damaged guest house being secured by security teams at the life she'd built in 3 chaotic weeks. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'm not ruling anything out anymore. This whole experience taught me that the rules I thought governed the world aren't as fixed as I believed. Sometimes the criminals protect you better than the authorities. Sometimes the monsters are more human than the heroes. Sometimes you have to make choices that don't fit into neat categories of right and wrong." "That's very philosophical for 5 a.m., Sophie observed. "I haven't slept. Philosophy happens when you're running on adrenaline and existential crisis." They headed inside as the sun climbed higher, transforming the estate from crime scene back into the beautiful, dangerous sanctuary it had always been. Lena's future felt uncertain in ways both terrifying and oddly liberating. No clear path forward, no obvious next steps, just possibilities spreading out like unmarked roads. But Sophie was safe. Grant was gone, and Lena had discovered reserves of strength and capability she hadn't known existed. For now, that was enough. Watching her sister regain weight and energy and color in her cheeks felt like watching a miracle happen in slow motion, evidence that sometimes desperate gambles paid off in ways that justified the risks. Lena's work with Brutus had progressed beyond basic rehabilitation into something approaching genuine partnership. The dog who'd been a weapon 3 months ago now demonstrated complex behavioral understanding, responding to subtle cues and displaying emotional intelligence that suggested trauma could be healed rather than just managed. Their training sessions had become collaborative rather than corrective, Brutus offering trust and Lena offering guidance in an exchange that felt mutual and earned. He's ready for public reintegration, Lena told Moretti during a progress review in mid-November. The estate grounds dusted with early snow that made everything look softened and clean. The way her pulse kicked up when she heard his voice in the hallway, the way she found excuses to extend their training debriefs beyond strict necessity. But acknowledging those feelings meant confronting the complicated reality that she was developing attachment to a man whose world operated by rules she was still learning, whose power came from sources she'd spent her life avoiding, whose protection had saved her, but also fundamentally changed who she was. "I'm focused on Brutus," Lena said firmly, redirecting the conversation before it could spiral further. "Everything else is secondary." Sophie's knowing smile suggested she wasn't buying the deflection, but she dropped it. "Well, good luck with your definitely just professional dinner. Try not to accidentally fall in love over pasta." "You're the worst." "I know, it's part of my charm." Vincent drove them to Corso in the same black SUV that had collected Lena from Queens all those weeks ago. The vehicle now familiar territory rather than intimidating unknown. Brutus sat in the back beside Lena, calm and alert, but not anxious, his body language suggesting confidence rather than the coiled spring tension that used to define him. "You've done remarkable work with him," Vincent said, catching her eye in the rearview mirror. "Mr. Moretti mentioned you think he's ready for public reintegration. That's significant progress." "He's put in the work," Lena replied, stroking Brutus's head. "I just provided the framework. The healing was all him." Corso looked exactly as Lena remembered. Elegant, expensive, intimidating in the way places catering to the city's power players always were. But walking through the door felt different this time. She wasn't a waitress trying to be invisible. She was a guest, arriving with Moretti and his now famous dog, commanding attention rather than deflecting it. Marco, the floor manager, greeted them with the kind of warmth that suggested Moretti had already communicated expectations. "Ms. Hart, wonderful to see you again, and Brutus, looking remarkably well-behaved." "He's made significant progress," Lena said, feeling pride swell at the evidence of transformation. 3 months ago, Brutus had nearly torn through this dining room. Tonight, he walked calmly to their corner table and settled at Moretti's feet without prompting. The dinner unfolded with surprising ease. Brutus remained relaxed despite the restaurant's ambient noise and movement, his training holding strong even when servers passed close with trays or other diners raised their voices in laughter. Each moment of calm was a victory, evidence that trauma could be overcome with patience and proper support. Lena found herself relaxing too, the professional anxiety giving way to genuine enjoyment of the evening. Moretti was different outside the estate's formal boundaries, more open, sharing stories about his childhood in Brooklyn, his complicated relationship with his family's legacy, the weight of maintaining an empire built on foundations he hadn't chosen but had inherited. "My father always said the hardest part of this life isn't the violence or the risk," Moretti said over dessert, his voice low enough to not carry beyond their table. "It's the isolation, never being able to fully trust anyone because trust is a weakness people will exploit." "But you trust Vincent," Lena observed, "and Marcus. Your inner circle." "Trust them with my life, yes, but there's a difference between professional trust and genuine connection. One is transactional. The other requires vulnerability most people in my position can't afford." He paused, and something in his expression shifted. "Until recently, I thought those two things were mutually exclusive in my world." The weight of the statement settled between them, heavy with implication. "What changed?" Lena asked quietly. "You did." Moretti's eyes met hers directly, dark and intense and absolutely certain. "You walked into chaos with nothing but instinct and compassion, stopped a situation everyone else thought was unsalvageable, and showed me that sometimes the most valuable thing someone can offer is honest care without agenda. That's rare, Lena. That's worth protecting." Lena's breath caught, her careful professional boundaries suddenly feeling inadequate for the moment. "I just did what seemed right." "Exactly. You didn't calculate angles or position for advantage. You saw a traumatized animal and a person being extorted and responded with integrity. That's not common in my experience, that's exceptional." Before Lena could formulate a response that wouldn't expose how much his words affected her, movement near the restaurant's entrance caught her attention. A woman was entering with the kind of presence that turned heads, late 30s, elegant in the way money and confidence created, moving through the dining room like she owned it. Moretti's expression shifted, professional mask sliding into place. Shit. What? Who is she? Isabella Marchetti, my ex-wife. His voice carried tension Lena hadn't heard before. This is going to be complicated. Isabella spotted them within seconds, her path changing course to approach their table with deliberate intention. Up close she was stunning, dark hair, sharp features, eyes that assessed Lena in a single sweeping glance, and apparently found her interesting rather than threatening. Dante, Isabella said warmly, like they were old friends rather than former spouses. I heard you were dining here tonight. Thought I'd stop by and say hello. Isabella. Moretti stood, the gesture automatic courtesy despite visible discomfort. This is Lena Hart. She's been working with Brutus. Lena? Isabella Marchetti. The famous dog whisperer, Isabella said, extending her hand. I've heard impressive things about your work. Dante's associates are quite taken with Brutus's transformation. Lena shook her hand, noting the casual mention of Moretti's associates that confirmed Isabella wasn't just familiar with his world, but embedded in it. He's made remarkable progress. The credit belongs to him more than me. Modest? How refreshing. Isabella's smile was sharp and not entirely friendly. Dante, might I borrow you for a moment? Business matter that can't wait. It wasn't really a question. Moretti glanced at Lena with something like apology before following Isabella to a quieter corner of the restaurant, leaving Lena alone with Brutus and a rapidly cooling dessert. The dog sensed her tension, pressing closer to her leg in the comforting behavior they'd developed. Lena scratched his ears, trying not to obviously watch Moretti and Isabella's conversation, while absolutely watching it from her peripheral vision. Their body language was familiar, not romantic, but intimate in the way people who'd shared history became. Isabella was animated, gesturing with wine-glass precision, while Moretti listened with the careful attention he gave serious matters. Whatever they were discussing wasn't casual. After 10 minutes that felt like an hour, Moretti returned alone. Isabella had disappeared, presumably to her own table or her own agenda. I apologize for that, Moretti said, settling back into his chair with visible effort to reclaim the evening's earlier ease. Isabella has a gift for timing her interruptions for maximum impact. Is everything okay? Lena asked carefully, not wanting to pry but unable to completely hide her concern. Define okay. Moretti's smile was wry. She's proposing a business merger that would expand both our territories significantly. It's actually a smart strategic move, which makes it hard to refuse for purely personal reasons. Personal reasons like not wanting to work closely with your ex-wife? Among other things, he paused, seeming to wrestle with how much to share. Isabella and I divorced 3 years ago because we wanted fundamentally different things from life. She wanted empire building and legacy creation. I wanted something quieter, less violent, more genuine. You wanted out, Lena said, understanding clicking into place. I wanted options beyond the life my father built and I inherited. But when you're born into this world, exit strategies are complicated. There's no simple resignation letter. Moretti looked at Brutus, then at Lena. Working with you, watching Brutus heal from trauma and learn to trust again, it's reminded me that transformation is possible even when it seems impossible. That being made into something doesn't mean you have to stay that thing forever. The vulnerability in his admission was staggering, and Lena felt the full weight of what he was offering, not just professional respect, but genuine emotional honesty. What are you saying? She asked softly. I'm saying that I'm tired of running an organization I inherited rather than chose. I'm saying I've been working with federal prosecutors for 6 months to provide information that will help dismantle the more violent elements of my father's legacy. I'm saying I want out, Lena. I want a life that doesn't require bulletproof cars and armed security and constant vigilance. He met her eyes directly. And I'm saying that knowing you has made me believe that kind of life might actually be possible. Lena's mind reeled, trying to process the implications. You're cooperating with federal prosecutors? Dante, that's dangerous. Yes, which is why only Vincent, Marcus, and my attorney know. The deal is complex. I provide intelligence on organized crime networks in exchange for immunity and assistance transitioning my legitimate businesses away from the illegal operations. It'll take years to fully extract myself, but the process is underway. Why are you telling me this? Because I trust you. Because you've proven yourself honest and loyal in situations where either quality could have gotten you killed. And because... He stopped, seemed to gather courage, then continued. Because I care about you, Lena. More than I should given our current professional relationship and the complexity of my situation. But I wanted you to know that the version of me you see, the crime boss, the dangerous man, that's not who I want to be anymore. I'm working towards something different. The confession landed with the force of something precious and fragile, and Lena felt her careful emotional boundaries dissolving completely. I care about you too, she admitted, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable, which is complicated and probably inadvisable and definitely something I should have better boundaries about, but there it is. Moretti's smile transformed his entire face, genuine warmth replacing the careful control. Complicated and inadvisable seems to be our pattern. Maybe we're good at complicated, Lena suggested. Maybe we are. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze of conversation that ranged from serious to playful, professional boundaries officially abandoned in favor of something more honest and potentially more dangerous. By the time Vincent collected them, Lena felt like she'd crossed a threshold she couldn't uncross, acknowledging feelings that changed everything about how she understood her place in Moretti's world. Sophie was awake when Lena returned to their suite, curled on the couch with a book and obvious curiosity. So? Sophie prompted. How was your definitely just professional dinner? Shut up, Lena said, but she was smiling. That good, huh? Sophie grinned. I knew it. You're falling for him. It's more complicated than that. He's trying to leave his organization working with federal prosecutors to transition out. It's going to take years and it's dangerous and you're all in anyway, Sophie finished, because you're Lena Hart, and when you commit to something, you commit completely. It's your superpower and your fatal flaw rolled into one. The assessment was uncomfortably accurate. What do I do, Soph? I mean, caring about someone who's actively trying to dismantle a criminal empire while still running it, that's not exactly a stable foundation for a relationship. Is any foundation really stable? Sophie countered. Dad died when we were kids. Mom left because she couldn't handle it. You raised me while working double shifts and I got cancer. Stable is an illusion, Lena. The question isn't whether something's stable, it's whether it's worth the instability. When did you get so wise? Chemo gives you a lot of time to think about mortality and meaning. Turns out facing death makes you philosophical. Sophie set aside her book, her expression growing serious. Moretti's been good to us. Really good. He didn't have to help you take down Grant, or pay for my treatment, or offer us sanctuary when we had nowhere else to go. He did those things because he cares about you. That counts for something. Even though his caring comes wrapped in organized crime and federal investigations, especially because of that, it's easy to care about people when everything's safe and simple. Caring about someone enough to risk your empire, that's real. Lena pulled her sister into a hug, grateful for her wisdom and her survival in equal measure. I love you, you know that? I know, I love you too. Now go to bed and dream about your complicated mob boss boyfriend who's trying to go straight. He's not my boyfriend. Yet, Sophie said with absolute confidence. The next morning brought news that reshaped everything again. Marcus appeared at Lena's door at 7 a.m., his expression carrying urgency that overrode normal courtesy about waking hours. We need you in the study. Immediately. Lena followed him through the house, her mind racing through possibilities. Grant had escaped custody. Federal prosecutors had changed the deal. Isabella had caused problems. Something with Brutus. None of her guesses prepared her for what she found. Moretti sat behind his desk with Vincent and Rebecca Walsh, the attorney. Spread across the desk were photographs that made Lena's stomach drop. Surveillance images of the estate, detailed maps of security positions, tactical planning documents that suggested organized assault rather than lone actor violence. What is this? Lena asked. Retaliation, Moretti said grimly. Grant Voss had partners we didn't know about. Other corrupt agents who've been running similar operations using federal credentials to settle personal scores and intimidate civilians. When Grant got arrested, they apparently decided I needed to be dealt with before I could expose their network. They're planning to attack the estate, Vincent added. We intercepted communications this morning. They're coordinating for tomorrow night. Armed assault, multiple entry points designed to look like gang violence so they can claim self-defense afterward. Lena's blood ran cold. Sophie is being moved to a secure location within the hour, Walsh interrupted firmly, along with Patricia and full medical support. She'll be protected. And us? Lena asked. We have options, Moretti said. I can evacuate you with Sophie, put you both somewhere safe until this resolves. Or, he paused, meeting her eyes, or you can stay and help us turn their trap into ours. How would I help? I'm not tactical personnel. No, but you're smart, observant, and you've proven yourself capable under pressure. Plus, you know how corrupt federal agents think. You spent weeks outmaneuvering Grant. That perspective could be valuable. It was a choice, Lena realized. Safety or agency, protection or participation. I stay, she said without hesitation. Sophie goes somewhere secure, but I stay. The tactical planning consumed the entire day. Marcus laid out the corrupt agent's likely approach based on intercepted communications. Vincent positioned counter-response teams, and Moretti coordinated with his own federal contacts, prosecutors and agents who were apparently part of his immunity deal and had vested interest in stopping their corrupt colleagues. Lena contributed what she could, pointing out behavioral patterns she'd observed in Grant that might apply to his partners, suggesting psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited. It felt surreal, sitting in a war room planning defensive operations against federal agents, but the surreality was starting to feel normal. Sophie left at 2 p.m., tearful but brave, hugging Lena with the fierce desperation of someone who'd learned not to take goodbyes for granted. Come back, Sophie whispered. Please, come back. I will, Lena promised. This is almost over, just one more fight, and then we're free. The attack came at midnight, exactly as Marcus had predicted. Lena watched from Moretti's study as multiple vehicles approached the estate's perimeter, their occupants moving with tactical precision that confirmed professional training. What the corrupt agents didn't know was that every step they took was being documented by cameras they couldn't see, recorded by equipment they didn't know existed, witnessed by legitimate federal agents who'd been positioned specifically to intercept this illegal operation. The trap sprung with devastating efficiency. Lights flooded the grounds, FBI vehicles surrounded the attackers, and within minutes, what should have been a violent assault became a mass arrest operation. Lena watched through the monitors as 8 former federal agents were taken into custody, their weapons confiscated, their communications seized, their conspiracy exposed in real-time documentation that would guarantee prosecution. It's over, Moretti said quietly, standing beside her at the window. Really over this time. The aftermath took weeks to fully resolve. The arrested agents faced charges ranging from conspiracy to attempted murder, their corruption network unraveling under federal investigation. Grant Voss, facing additional charges for his role in coordinating the attack, accepted a plea deal that guaranteed 20 years in federal prison. Sophie returned to the estate healthy, her latest scans showing complete remission. The oncology team declared her cancer-free, the experimental treatment having exceeded all expectations. Moretti's federal cooperation deal progressed, his transition away from criminal operations moving forward with surprising speed now that his intelligence had helped dismantle multiple corrupt networks. And Lena found herself standing at another threshold, this one opening onto possibility rather than danger. I've been thinking about your suggestion, she said to Moretti one evening in late December, snow falling gently over the estate grounds. About me being wasted as just a dog trainer. And I think you might be right. I'm good at reading people, at navigating complicated situations, at finding strategic solutions to seemingly impossible problems. She paused, then continued. I want to do something meaningful with those skills. Help people who are trapped in situations like I was, victims of corruption, people being exploited by authority figures, cases where normal channels fail. Moretti smiled, and it was the genuine expression she'd learned to distinguish from his professional mask. I know an attorney who specializes in exactly those kinds of cases, Rebecca Walsh. She's been looking for an investigator to join her practice, someone who understands how to operate in gray areas while maintaining ethical boundaries. You already talked to her about me, Lena said, not quite a question. I suggested you might be interested. The decision is entirely yours. It was the right offer at the right time, and Lena felt the future clicking into place with satisfying certainty. I'll talk to her, she decided. Good. And Lena? Moretti moved closer, his presence warm and solid. About the other thing we've been carefully not discussing directly for the past month. You mean the part where we have feelings for each other that complicate our professional relationship and probably violate several common-sense boundaries? Lena smiled. That thing? That thing. He reached for her hand, the gesture tentative despite everything they'd survived together. I know the timing is terrible and my situation is complicated and you deserve someone whose life doesn't come with federal investigations and transitional periods. Dante. Lena squeezed his hand, stopping the spiral. I don't want someone whose life is simple and safe. I want someone who's honest about their complexity and working to become better. That's you. That's worth waiting for. Even if the waiting takes years? Even then. He kissed her then, soft and careful and full of promise, and Lena felt the final piece of her new life settle into place. 6 months later, Lena Hart sat in Rebecca Walsh's law office, reviewing case files for people who needed the kind of help that blended legal expertise with strategic intervention. Sophie was healthy, attending school, planning her 16th birthday party with the enthusiasm of someone who'd earned the right to celebrate life. Moretti's transition was progressing, his legitimate businesses thriving, his illegal operations being systematically dismantled under federal oversight, his path toward genuine exit becoming clearer with each passing month. Brutus had become something of a celebrity, his transformation from violent enforcer to therapy dog inspiring features in veterinary journals and behavioral science publications. He spent his days visiting hospitals and schools, proving that trauma could be healed and monsters could become miracles with proper care. And Lena had discovered that her gift for navigating impossible situations translated perfectly into advocacy work for people trapped in systems designed to exploit them. She was no longer the scared waitress drowning in medical debt, willing to take any lifeline offered. She was Lena Hart, investigator, advocate, survivor, and someone who'd learned that the most dangerous thing you could do was exactly what she'd done that night at Corso. Step forward when everyone else stepped back. See possibility where others saw only threat. Choose courage over comfort, even when the cost seemed too high to pay. The broken Pitbull had found his way back to calm. The dying girl had found her way back to health. The corrupt agents had found their way to justice. And Lena had found her way to a life she'd never imagined but had somehow always been moving toward, built on foundations of honesty, courage, and the revolutionary act of believing that transformation was possible, even for things that seemed permanently broken. Sophie was right, Lena thought, closing her case file and preparing for her next client consultation. Stable was an illusion. The real question was whether something was worth the instability. And this life, complicated, dangerous, full of people who'd been made into weapons and were learning to be something gentler, this was absolutely worth it. Every terrifying, beautiful, impossible piece of it.